Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 601. Granny Sees Small Shoes. That devil god was fighting the god of great ruins who was guarding that sacrificial altar, and even though he could see and hear in all directions, his enemy was simply too strong. Thus, he had no choice but to put in complete focus. When this shirt came flying over, he didn't felt any threat from it, thus he didn't put up his guard. When the shirt was cloaked onto his body, only then did he react, but it was already too late. Once the shirt of Granny C was on, it rapidly shrunk and binding his chest and causing his chest to contract rapidly. His ribs also snapped one by one. This shirt seemed to have been covered with needles that stabbed into his body, and a sharp pain traveled over, making him unable to bear it. That devil god couldn't catch his breath, so he hurriedly shrunk his body. As a devil god, controlling the size of their body was naturally very simple. Right at this moment, his opponent swept over with a sword, and he managed to coincidentally avoided this sword as he was shrinking his body. However, as he shrunk, that shirt also shrunk, but it still bound him tightly. Just break! His body expanded, but that shirt didn't expand along with him. That devil god instantly heard the sounds of his ribs breaking. Not only did his ribs break, but his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were also all squashed at nearly the same time. His chest was bound into the thickness of a thumb, and there were silver needles everywhere in the shirt, covering his entire body. They destroyed his bodily functions, and when he expanded his body under such a situation, he was truly seeking death. That god that was fighting with him stabbed his sword through his head. In that instant his body expanded, nailing his primordial spirit to death. That devil god stared with his eyes wide open and blood poured out from his mouth. He rasped, "If I wasn't wearing this small shirt, you wouldn't have defeated me." After he said so, he took his last breath. That shirt automatically came off from his corpse and returned to Granny C's side. The shirt automatically disassembled into cloth strips and returned back into the basket. Qin Mu looked at the cloth strips in the basket and he probed. Granny C's skill in tailoring is becoming more and more outstanding. Where are these cloth strips from? Why are they able to bind a devil god's corporeal body? The cloth strips are weaved from the tendons of gods, and there are also a few tendons of dragons. I found them in great ruins. Because there's too little, I can only weave them into cloth strips. Granny C said with a smile. The crux is still great educational heavenly devil scriptures, which is able to sew these tattered cloth strips together and made the devil god unable to break free. Qin Mu blinked his eyes. Other than a shirt, what else can Granny make? I can still make 2 small shoes. I still have some strong cloth soles made from the skin of a devil god. It's more than enough to make 2 pairs of cloth shoes. Granny C took out 2 pairs of soles and she blinked her eyes while smiling. Once one wears my small shoes, I can definitely make him neither live nor die. He will be unable to take them off no matter what. Does Moor wants to wear the small shoes Granny make? I don't. You have made me wear too many small shoes when I was little, and now my feet are all squeezed small. As they talked, that god from great ruins that was guarding the altar invited them. May 2 Dao friends come up to gather. Qin Mu and Granny C scaled up the altar. That god was like a jade tree in the wind and looked very handsome. When he saw Granny C's appearance, his Dao heart was slightly shaken and he hurriedly stabilized his spirit. He bowed to express his gratitude. So it's Cult Master Qin. Is this a Dao friend from Supreme Emperor Heaven? Thank you for your assistance. Senior recognizes me? Qin Mu was astonished. That god said with a smile, Heavenly Teacher has talked about Cult Master once. Qin Mu hurriedly asked, Where's Heavenly Teacher? Over there. That god raised his finger to point into the distance. From here on, the 6th sacrificial altar is where Heavenly Teacher is guarding. I need to stay here and guard the sacrificial altar here, so I can't escort the both of you. Pardon me. Qin Mu and Granny C bade farewell and walked towards the direction he had pointed. On the journey, they saw other sacrificial altars also being attacked. It was either the devil army pouring towards the sacrificial altar like a flood, or it was devil god fighting the god alone, struggling over the power to control the altar. Qin Mu and Granny C would help if they could, and if they couldn't, they would take a detour. A sacrificial altar had already fallen into the hands of the devil race, and the god on top should have been killed. This was something that couldn't be prevented. Saint Woodcutter has grabbed hold of what the devil race cherishes the most and used Luofu Heaven as a threat. The devil race had no choice but to pit their lives and seize back some capital for negotiation. Luofu Heaven is so dangerous, yet there are actually still devils dwelling here. Qin Mu and Granny C saw the bones and corpses of numerous devil gods being erected in some restricted areas. Over there were stone tablets of various elevation, and on the stone tablets, devil writings were engraved. They should be used for defending against the natural disasters here. Furthermore, the devils were living in the divine treasures of these devil gods' corpses. It seemed that after the natural disaster happened, some devil gods have offered out their bodies to let their clansmen survive. Granny C, why does this devil world have natural disasters? Where are these natural disasters coming from? Qin Mu was puzzled, and he raised his head to look at the broken planet in the sky. The planet was extremely huge and was currently moving. It raised even more natural disasters and invoked the earth, water, wind, and fire. There were still shattered pieces of stars in the sky, and they descended down like fire snakes, crashing somewhere. Granny C shook her head. How would I know? Maybe this place is a true natural disaster, or maybe some god had used great magic power to move these planets over, using them to descend disasters down. As for what the exact reason is, maybe only existence like Fu Riluo could know. Finally, they came to the sixth sacrificial altar. Qin Mu and Granny C looked from afar and saw the devil Qi on that sacrificial altar were separated into black and white. They swirled around each other in the sky above, just like two huge fishes slowly swimming with their heads connected to each other's tails. Fu Riluo has arrived. Qin Mu's heart was astonished. I wonder if Lu Li is here? If Lu Li is here, Saint Woodcutter will be in danger. He looked up the sacrificial altar, and he could see numerous different divine treasures, but other than Saint Woodcutter and Fu Riluo's divine treasures, he didn't see any more divine treasures that had already stepped into the celestial palaces or devil god palaces. Lu Li wasn't among those that followed Fu Riluo up the sacrificial altar. Instead, they were some disciples that had yet to cultivate to devil gods, so they weren't of much threat. Contrariwise, they were a few divine treasures of devil god below the sacrificial altar. Fu Riluo must have also been afraid that Saint Woodcutter would suddenly become ruthless and just sacrifice Luofu Heaven. Thus he left the devil gods that had followed him at the bottom of the altar. Qin Mu put his heart at ease and followed Granny C to walk towards the sixth sacrificial altar. When they came to the bottom of the sacrificial altar, Qin Mu saw the black tiger god, and he couldn't help becoming delighted. He waved his hand at him. The black tiger god paid him no attention and wielded his two hammers in his hands. He looked nervously at those two devil gods on the other side. Saint Woodcutter's voice rang out. Qin Mu, gods are not allowed to step foot on the altar. That woman beside you can remain below, you can come up. Qin Mu acknowledged. Granny C couldn't resist saying, Sacred Teacher, I'm the previous saintess of Heavenly Saint Cult. I admire Sacred Teacher very much. May I beg Sacred Teacher let me take a look at you? On the sacrificial altar, Saint Woodcutter popped his head out and looked down. He couldn't help becoming slightly stunned, and he said slowly, What a woman! Almost messing up my Tao heart. Heavenly Saint Cult has no relations to me. You have also taken a look at me, so don't come up, otherwise the frame of mind will be unstable. Granny C could only acknowledge and remained beside the black tiger god. She instructed with a low voice, Muir, after you go up, don't execute Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. If you have to, you need to paste this golden willow leaf on the heart of your brows. Granny, don't worry, I will. Qin Mu walked up the steps with wide steps and finally came up to the top of the sacrificial altar not long later. He saw Fu Riluo and Saint Woodcutter each sitting high up in their seats, and below Fu Riluo were a few youths. Shahuali was among them, and that young master Qi Jui from the celestial heavens was also there. Pub Future adds. However, Qi Jui had his own seat, which showed that his status dictated that he had the rights to take a seat. Qin Mu walked forward and bowed to Saint Woodcutter. He then greeted Fu Riluo, and Fu Riluo sat them motionlessly, gently nodding his head as a return of greeting. Qin Mu then greeted Qi Jui and Zhihuali. The two of them returned the greeting and didn't have a hint of arrogance just because Qin Mu was their opponent. Qin Mu came to the bottom of St. Woodcutter and stood there. Fu Riluo looked at him curiously and saw the white ribbon covering Qin Mu's eyes, yet there was a vertical eye that was on the heart of his brows, which allowed him to see. He said with a smile, "Little friend Qin, the eye in the heart of your brows sure is strange." The eye in the heart of Qin Mu's brows hung down, and he didn't look at him. Fu Riluo laughed and said, "Why don't you dare to look at me? Could you be scared of me? You are still young. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. If you have fear for me, I worry for your future cultivation and Dao heart. Come, raise your head and take a look at me." Qin Mu disregarded his words. Qi Jui and Zhihuali were also examining Qin Mu. They were also puzzled and didn't know why Qin Mu would cover up his eyes. Furthermore, they were very curious about the third eye in the heart of his brows. St. Woodcutter looked at Qin Mu and he only saw him hanging his head down in slight dejection. He said with a smile, "Qin Mu, why have you come to find me? Why have you covered up your eyes?" "Oh, I know, you have crossed gazes with Fu Riluo again." Qin Mu nodded his head and he was ashamed. Disciple and the few elders in my family laid a diversion and stopped Senior Fu Riluo's army of 1,000,000. Thus I got harmed by Fu Riluo again. When I cross-gazed with him, he had placed another divine art in my eyes. If I look into the mirror, I would be taken away by him. I don't know how to solve this kind of divine art, thus I've come to find teacher. St. Woodcutter said with a smile, "Fu Riluo is your senior, he's joking with you. He's right here, so why does he need to play these little tricks to take you away? Undo your silk ribbon. Let me see how he kidnap you." Qin Mu undid the silk ribbon and revealed his eyes. St. Woodcutter said with a smile, "Look in the mirror. See if he can seize you." Qin Mu took out the mirror and take a look. Fu Riluo's figure appeared once more and became larger and larger as he walked out from the mirror. Qin Mu's hands trembled as he couldn't bear the weight of the mirror. Fu Riluo in the mirror was actually the Fu Riluo in his own eyes. He was about to devour him like a nightmare. Suddenly, St. Woodcutter swung the axe he used to chop firewood and chopped onto the mirror Qin Mu was holding. On the other side, Fu Riluo grunted and a bloody mark suddenly appeared on the heart of his brows. Qin Mu felt like he was released from a burden and the pressure vanished completely. St. Woodcutter pulled back his axe and said with a smile, "I told you Fu Riluo is joking with you. He is your senior. How could he lay his hands on you? Won't he be worried that I get angered and chop his disciples to death?" A trail of blood flowed down from the heart of Fu Riluo's brows, separating apart when it reached his nose bridge. His 3 faces all revealed looks of anger. "Old friend, you should know if you continue to guard Luofu heaven, you might not die, but your 24 Dao friends will be unable to escape death." He turned to another face and said solemnly, "It's not our devil race that wants to wipe you out. The one that truly wants to wipe you guys out is someone else. With your wisdom, you should know how powerful he is, so why aren't you letting them send themselves to death?" Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 602, A Pair of Embroidered Shoes. They are like me, a person who should be long dead. We should have died in the battlefield 20,000 years ago. We are only forced to live until now by the situation. St. Woodcutter placed his axe aside and he sighed ruefully. "Fu Riluo, do you know? If it was during founding emperor era, a small devil god jumping around like you would have long been sent up to god execution stage to be executed. Now is not like the past. I admire you very much and I also know your abilities and methods. When you always didn't invite people of the celestial heavens forward and relied on your own strength to attack Supreme Emperor Heaven, I knew you didn't want to be under someone's rule. You have your own ambition and magnificent aspiration. You want to use Supreme Emperor Heaven as a springboard to jump to founding Emperor Celestial Heavens. Your ambition is very big." Fu Riluo gave a slight smile. "How can a man not have any ambition in this world? If one doesn't have any, what's the difference between them and a dried fish?" St. Woodcutter shook his head. "Have you ever thought of what happens if you take over founding Emperor Celestial Heavens? Will you be wiped out? To put away the bow once the birds are gone, to boil the hound once it caught the rabbit, you should understand that, right? When you attack until great ruins, the moment you wipe out eternal peace is also the end of you and your clansmen. The disaster of your clan being wiped out is merely inches away. With Fu Riluo as your name, the wise sage of the devil race, you wouldn't not understand it, am I right? Fu Riluo's neck turned and he changed to his face on the right. He said leisurely, Saint is skilled in attacking the heart. You may be looked like you are thinking for me, but it's actually the method of attacking the heart. The logic you had said, I understand, but I also know I need to find a path of survival for my people. As for whether the celestial heavens will wipe me out or not, it is still a possibility. At most I will stoop down to become a dog. The celestial heavens won't stoop so low to kill a dog, right? His left face smiled and said, a man living in this world needs to be flexible. Dao brother, if you are still insistent of using Luofu heaven to threaten me, I don't need to kill you. There will naturally be someone who will kill you. Dao brother, what's the harm in you being flexible? Saint Woodcutter shook his head and said, if I want to be a dog, I could have done so 20,000 years ago. If I can stand and live, I rather stand. Fu Riluo's gaze wavered. But after more people die, you will still end up lying down like a dead dog. Saint Woodcutter smiled and said, I'm not afraid of being broken into pieces. I'm willing to die even more miserably. Don't worry, I won't die lying on the ground. The terms you proposed for me to let out part of Eternal Peace's territory to your devil race. Now Qin Mu is here, I can tell you. His expression suddenly turned cold. As long as we are alive, founding Emperor's land, we will never give up an inch of land. Stretch your leg in and I'll chop it off. Stretch your head in and I'll chop it off. If your devil race dares to enter eternal peace, I will wipe out your devil race. He said coldly, founding Emperor's land, you can forget about it. Fu Riluo heard what he said and his three faces also instantly turned solemn. He said coldly, that means we have no negotiation. In that case, let us sign the Pact of Earth Count. He raised his brush and rapidly wrote the words in the oath. He gently raised his hands and the paper flew towards Saint Woodcutter. Saint Woodcutter also wrote down his oath and exchanged paper with him. The two of them examined each other's oath and they checked whether there were flaws. They then used their brushes to change some terms and exchanged the oaths back to check again. They examined it carefully once more and fixed parts they couldn't accept. In this way, over and over again, they finally agreed on each other's oaths. The two of them stood up and they said their oaths. Fu Riluo used the devil language while Saint Woodcutter used the god language. Both languages rang out at the same time and the two languages carried different profound theory and marvel. They even attacked each other. Qin Mu was skilled in both types of languages, so no matter if it was the devil language or god language, he understood both and subconsciously fell into a trance. The space suddenly vibrated and this mountain under their feet also shook continuously. Everyone on the sacrificial altar hurriedly stabilized their footing. Under the sacrificial altar, Granny C and the Black Tiger God were facing the other two devil gods and the ground under their feet also automatically floated up. The four gods stabilized themselves to prevent them from being taken advantage of. Granny C swayed left and right. Her cultivation seemed to be lacking as she fell back several steps. An embroidered shoes fell off in an accident so she could only stabilize herself with a bare foot. The eyes of that devil god that was facing off her light up and didn't allow her to react. He stretched his hand to pick up that embroidered shoe and with the shoe in his hand, that devil god stared at Granny C's white feet. He chuckled and placed the shoe under his nose to take a sniff. Granny C was furious and stretched her hand out with a smile that was yet not a smile. Return my shoe to me. That devil god chuckled and placed the shoe into his chest. I take pity on little beauty. Your shoe. I'll keep it. Granny C was furious. She took out the other shoe and threw it at him. You are a devil god after all. An existence that's high above. How can you be so frivolous? That devil god raised his other hand to catch the shoe and he stared at her pair of white feet. He chuckled and said, Nice! Now I've got a pair. Little beauty is truly born so delicately. I also have some concubines of the human race. If you listen to me, I can make you my primary wife. I will go back home and eat that fated old woman of mine." Granny C chuckled and said, "If you eat your fated old woman, I still need to worry when I will become a fated old woman and wait for you to eat me. You can't wear my small shoes too, so you can take them." The black tiger god frowned and thought to himself, "Where is this woman from? Her words are incoherent," and she started to flirt with this devil god. "She's really a person that's unreliable like Junior Brother Chin." The surroundings were shrouded by thick darkness, and suddenly, lights from flame traveled out from the darkness as a pair of huge sharp horns gradually rose from the darkness below the sacrificial altar. The surroundings of the sacrificial altar were as dark as night. The 9 bends and 18 curves of that pair of sharp horns were as tall as clouds and far surpassed the sacrificial altar. The black tiger god's heart was greatly startled, and his hammers accidentally fell from his hands. He hurriedly picked them up and raised his head to look at this pair of sharp horns that was continuously rising from the darkness. After a moment, the apparition of Earth Count only revealed its head, and the 2 sharp horns had already pierced to a height that was on par with the planets in outer space. That fierce tiger face of Earth Count was hidden in the darkness, and the flames in his eyes made his face glowed from time to time. The huge and magnificent sacrificial altar was also lit up from time to time under his gaze. Earth Count was waiting quietly for them to read out their oaths. This was the apparition of Earth Count and not really Earth Count. It was his power being projected onto this world to witness these 2 strong practitioners making a pact. Earth Count couldn't descend personally as his corporeal body was simply too vast. If he descended, this weak world also wouldn't be able to handle it. Chin Mu became excited and waved his hand vigorously at the apparition of Earth Count. Earth Count's expression was solemn and paid no attention to him. Chin Mu continued to wave excitedly, and he shouted, "Me! It's me! Earth Count, we have met before. I'm Chin Fengqing. You even sealed me." Earth Count continued to pay no attention to him. Chin Mu continued to wave excitedly. The corners of Earth Count's eyes trembled. "Be dignified. Don't take to me. I'm handling business." Shahuali and Chi Jui looked at each other in dismay and felt an astonishment in his heart. Fu Riluo and Saint Woodcutter finished reading the oath and signed the Pact of Earth Count. That majestic Earth Count's head took a look at Chin Mu, who was waiting excitedly to talk to him. Chi Jui hesitated for a moment, and he walked over to greet Earth Count. Earth Count paid no attention to him and said to Chin Mu, "Don't create trouble." After saying so, he gradually sank into the darkness and slowly disappeared, leaving Chin Mu and Chi Jui on the sacrificial altar. When his sharp horns completely sank into the ground, the darkness also scattered and the surroundings regained brightness. Saint Woodcutter stared at Chin Mu. Fu Riluo also stared at Chin Mu. Chi Jui and Jahuali's gazes also fell onto Chin Mu. Earth Count always had the solemn and dignified image of controlling life and death. He never chit-chat, and every time there was strong practitioners making an oath, his power would be projected over as a witness, and that kind of aura was dark and terrifying, making people unable to breathe. And this time, not only did the apparition of Earth Count talk, he even seemed very familiar with Chin Mu. This couldn't help make people suspect if Earth Count would be impartial when making a pact to him. The reason why Earth Count had become the figure of making a pact was because he didn't have any selfishness. If he did, that would be very terrifying. "I couldn't see that little friend Chin and Earth Count's relationship was so good," Fu Riluo said while beaming with a smile. Chin Mu closed all 3 eyes and didn't look at him. He grunted and said, "If our relationship was so good, he wouldn't have sealed me." Fu Riluo put his heart down, and he suddenly thought of that jade pendant of Chin Mu. He felt frightened in his heart. "That jade pendant is Earth Count's seal? I've suppressed the seal that day, which was why I released that Devil King." He felt enlightened, and the rock on his heart was finally placed on the ground. Earth Count's personally sealed him, so it seems like he can forget about breaking free from the seal. Now I can be at ease when dealing with him. It's just that this brat don't dare to look at me anymore. At this moment, a miserable scream came from the below, and everyone on the altar were astonished. They hurriedly came to the border to take a look down. They saw a devil god hugging his legs and rolling around in pain. On the feet of that devil god was a pair of delicately embroidered shoes. The shoes were only 3 inches, and they were filled with needles which pricked the feet of the devil god and turned them bloody. The body of the devil god was sometimes small and sometimes big as he tried to break free of the shoes, but they only shrunk and didn't become bigger. At this moment, the bones in both of his feet were completely shattered and the pain was indescribable. On the side, the black tiger god and the other devil god looked at Granny C in fear. They didn't dare to get closer. Both the bones in your feet are completely broken. Granny C spoke cheerfully and advised him with a gentle and soft voice. Sever them. When the embroidery needles swim all the way to your heart and lungs, or even to your brain, that will be too late. That devil god trembled from the pain and he gritted his teeth. He hissed, "You tricked me into wearing your small shoes," Granny C said in astonishment. "You wanted to wear them yourself? When have I ever lied to you?" On the sacrificial altar, Fu Riluo raised his eyebrows and sneered at Saint Woodcutter. "This is another one of your disciple? She's the same as Dao brother, injuring people with a stab in the back." Saint Woodcutter was also slightly astonished and he shook his head. "Not consider my disciple, but her wits is comparable to mine." Fu Riluo snorted and his voice reached the bottom of the altar. "Mu Toluo, your divine art isn't exquisite enough. You can't suppress her needles. The longer you delay, the more your life will be in danger. Chop off your 2 legs." That devil god was currently trying his best to suppress the embroidery needles that were flowing into his blood vessels from the embroidered shoes. They were so thin that they were hard to detect, yet they were as nimble as fine swords, tunneling into his blood vessels. He used his vital chi and transformed them into different divine arts block the needles off. But because it was his own body, he couldn't execute any powerful divine art, so he couldn't block these needles. He heard Fu Riluo's words and gave a shout. With tears flowing down his cheeks, he wiped his tears to chop down, removing both of his calves. Where his legs were severed, numerous fine silver needles came flowing out like water. The forging method of heavenly works god race. Fu Riluo saw the forging method of founding emperor's heavenly works god race and his heart was astonished. He suddenly remembered that old blacksmith beside Qin Mu. Granny C's silver needles must be from that old blacksmith. A blacksmith, a tailor, a painter, an apothecary. What kind of people are hanging around this Qin Mu? Fu Riluo also couldn't help feeling his head aching. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 603, Dragged to Death. The silver needles that came out from Mu Toluo's wounds returned back into the embroidered shoes and vanished without a trace. It was impossible to see where these silver needles were hiding at. That pair of embroidered shoes then came loose from that pair of severed legs and flew back into Granny C's basket. Granny C took out some strong cloth shawls and cloths to quickly make herself another pair of new embroidered shoes. She wore them on her feet and she shook her head. "You dirted my shoes and still have the face to whine so loudly. The devil race sure is an unreasonable bunch. You don't want your legs right, the skin on your calves are still in a good condition. I can make another pair of boots. The markings on it are natural decoration. Can you give them to me? You are so nice." Devil god Mu Toluo gave a piercing roar from the pain, and his hands trembled as he tried to seal the wounds on his severed leg. He prevented himself from bleeding, and when he heard this, fury boiled up in his chest. "Woman with a heart as malicious as snakes and scorpions. You erg." He puked out a mouthful of blood. Fu Riluo frowned and his face spread into a smile. "Hanging above lust is a deadly blade. It's Mu Toluo's own fault for being chopped. Shahuali, go down with the rest of them and leave as far as you can. Since we have already signed the Pact of Earth Count, I will need to have a good discussion with Heavenly Teacher now." Saint Woodcutter said with a smile. "Qin Mu, you should go down too. This is not a place you can stay in." Everyone was astonished. They knew after they signed the Pact of Earth Count, they would have no more burden, so they would definitely challenge each other. Qin Mu, Shahuali, Qi Jui, and the rest walked down the sacrificial altar. Shahuali said calmly, "The previous time, I got defeated by Brother Qin and Brother Qi together. I cannot accept it, so I would like to challenge both of you again." Not a problem, not a problem," Qin Mu walked down the altar with quick steps and he said with a smile, "Defeating you the previous time was purely by luck. I won't be so lucky this time." Qi Jui's gaze wavered and he said, "Brother Qin is cunning and have good tactics. I saw you are very familiar with Earth Count. Talking about some seal, would you mind telling me in detail?" Qin Mu couldn't help grabbing the jade pendant in front of his chest and he quietly put his hand down again. He laughed and said, "What seal? I didn't say anything about it." Qi Jui sneered. The three of them walked down the sacrificial altar and they took their strides at the same time. They also walked down the stairs at the same time, afraid to show their backs to the others. Qin Mu felt troublesome and his expression flickered. These two have learned from their mistakes, so it will be slightly difficult to stab them both in their backs. Both of them have been tricked by me before, so they learn fast. The Black Tiger God took a glance at his expression and he snorted. "Junior brother, your expression has changed again. Be careful not to let it affect your Dao heart. My lord and Fu Riluo is going to duel, and this is not a place we can stay in. Let us go. Mu Tualuo Yu Luosha, are you guys following or not?" Huge beads of cold sweat rolled down his forehead and he stood up with difficulty. He said coldly, "Woman with a malicious heart like snakes and scorpions who spoiled my feet. If I don't take revenge, how will have the face to meet my people?" Qin Mu couldn't resist saying, "This senior, my medical expertise is remarkable. If senior doesn't mind, I can help you reattach your legs. What so-called a healer treats his parents like their own parents would. I don't want to see anyone being injured. You can see whose leg you find suitable here. You can chop them off and I will help you attach it. I guarantee you will be up and jumping." Other people's expression changed tremendously and they all took a step back to prevent Mu Tuluo from chopping their legs off. Mu Tuluo endured the pan and he chuckled. "Little brat, do you think I will believe you? Even if I chop their legs to let you attack, you will still poison me." Qin Mu scratched his head. "Healer treats their patients like their parents would." "Bah! Shut up." Qin Mu sighed and his expression was bleak. "You don't know I'm truly kind in my heart. I know you are good-hearted and isn't willing to chop off the legs of your own people. But Qi Jui isn't your clansman, you can chop off his legs. Brother Qi, I'm not targeting you, just giving an example." Qi Jui's expression changed tremendously and his legs tightened. He said calmly, "Brother Qin, don't explain, I understand." The Black Tiger God and Granny C took the first step to walk into the distance. Qin Mu hurriedly followed up and Mu Tuluo took a glance at Qi Jui's legs. Qi Jui's legs tightened again and he said calmly, "I'm from the upper bound, Mu Tuluo. You can't offend me. Furthermore, if he's skilled in medicine, he's skilled in poison as well. If you believe him, you will definitely die." Mu Tuluo controlled the devil clouds to follow after Yu Luosha. He sneered and said, "That snake lady, respectable king and heavenly teacher has a fight and so do we. You can forget about leaving." Granny C turned around to give a radiant smile and Mu Tuluo was instantly infatuated. He chuckled and said, "No matter how beautiful you are, it's useless. I will definitely seize you and make you be willing to be my wife." Beside him, Yu Luosha was angered and suppressed her voice. "Mu Tuluo, you are feeling benevolence in your heart. You don't bear to kill her, but she won't hesitate to kill you." Mu Tuluo shook his head. "She won't kill me. When she smiled at me just now, I can see a hint of admiration in her smile." Yu Luosha said coldly, "Your Dao heart has already been destroyed by this demoness. Wake up. You shall deal with that black tiger and I will kill her." Mu Tuluo hesitated for a moment and he could only nod. He also felt there was something wrong with his state. He knew he had lost his legs by the trickery of this woman, but he couldn't bring himself to hate her. Not only could he not hate her, every frown and every smile from her tugged at his heart and influenced his judgment. It was like she was living in his heart, making him sink into deep love. This kind of situation was very dangerous. Maybe letting Yu Luosha dealing with her would be the best choice. "Yu Luosha, don't kill her," Mu Tuluo said seriously. "You also know my heart is rarely moved, and once it is, my love will never die. You can defeat her, but keep her alive." Yu Luosha gritted her teeth and she snorted. Qin Mu blinked his eyes and he thought to himself, could this be a heart devil planted in his Tao heart from great educational heavenly devil scriptures? When did Granny plant the heart devil in Mu Tuluo's Tao heart? They sprinted 1,000 miles and the black tiger god suddenly stopped. He looked around and saw a sigh of doomsday around here. There were earth, water, wind, and fire pouring continuously, and in the distance, there was even a huge meteor that had landed over there. It was round, black, and it interfered with the Earth magnetic field, distorting up and down. Right here then, the black tiger god laughed. Tao friends of the devil race, I feel this place is very good. No matter if it is to bury your corpses or to bury our corpses, that's a good feng shui land. Junior brother, go over to that black ball over there, so that you guys don't get affected. Yu Luosha and Mu Tuluo walked forward. Yu Luosha sneered and said, this land has buried too many devils. Only your corpses will be buried here. Granny C instructed Qin Mu and said, your third eye is still uncovered. Cover it quickly with the golden willow leaf. Don't use it recklessly. She gave some thoughts and instructed again. If you really can't win them, just take it down, it should be fine to use it. Qin Mu said with a smile, I'm just going over to chat with these few senior brothers. There won't be any danger. Granny C was still not at ease and she said, it's fine if it's Shahuali. Be careful of Chiji. His technique is very powerful, but it takes quite a while to execute it. This person is harboring unfathomable intentions and he has been staring at your chest. You can take the chance when he isn't ready to attack him first. It will then be easier to deal with other people. Qin Mu nodded his head solemnly and waved his hand, walking towards the meteor. Qi Jui walked side by side with him and he said indifferently, Brother Qin, I've heard everything. You want to attack me by surprise? Not that easy. Qin Mu said righteously, what is Brother Qin talking about? I have been learning ever since I was young and I'm familiar with the words of the saint. Why would I attack you by surprise? We are merely going to talk about the wind, flower, snow, and moon, nothing about the battle. Shahuali carried his demon knife and walked to his left side. Every step seemed to be measured perfectly and he said calmly, the previous time, both of you have worked together to defeat me. I don't really accept that defeat. We rarely gather together, so we naturally have to test each other. Qin Mu said with a smile, how can we keep fighting? Senior brothers over there, come along with us. Once the gods start fighting, we will be the ones to suffer. There were still 2 devil divine arts practitioners behind and they walked forward when they heard him. Everyone started to walk towards that meteor that was half hidden in the ground. These 2 devil divine arts practitioners came close and only realized something was wrong. Qin Mu, Shahuali and Qi Jui were crossing their qi activity, dragging the both of them in. Qin Mu, Shahuali, Qi Jui. The body movements and footwork of the 3 of them changed continuously and their aura was changing continuously. Every movement of their body contained hidden profound theory and the method of attack was hidden in their walk, which also involves the transformation of divine art and the transformation of qi activity. Even though the murderous intent couldn't be seen, the murderous intent was hidden inside. These 5 people walked forward. Qin Mu, Shahuali and Qi Jui had stable footsteps and they weren't messed up at all. Meanwhile, the footsteps of the other 2 devil divine arts practitioners behind them gradually turned messy as they stumbled left and right like drunk men. After walking 3 to 5 miles, the 2 devil divine arts practitioners have already exhausted everything they had and their faces were flushed. After 3 to 5 miles more, the 2 devil divine arts practitioners suddenly coughed up huge mouthful of blood and they stumbled as they ran. They followed behind the 3 of them. Another 3 to 5 miles later, those 2 devil divine arts practitioners have basically coughed up all the blood in their body and suddenly, the primordial spirit of one of them ignited and he turned into a man of fire. He took his last breath and his corpse collapsed onto the ground. In an instant, he turned into a pile of human-shaped charcoal. Dozens of yards more, the legs of the other devil divine arts practitioner broke and he collapsed onto the ground. His head then exploded with a pop and his primordial spirit split apart. Qin Mu raised his eyebrows and he gave a slight smile. Now, without them bothering us, we can slowly talk. Cold beads of sweat rolled off Shahuali and Qi Jui's foreheads, while the corner of their eyes twitched. As they crossed their chi, all of them couldn't just stop halfway. Chi Jui and Jihuali weren't working together and they were fighting each other too. Thus Qin Mu was able to drag that two devil divine arts practitioners to death. If they had worked together to deal with Qin Mu wouldn't have succeeded. Yet they could never have worked together. Qi Jui sneered and said, "Brother Qin said that we are talking, so why did you still have to lay a trap and drag those two devil senior brothers to death? However, our horizons are similar, so if you want to drag us to death, you will have to walk 1 to 2 years." The three of them walked to the side of the meteor and the magnetic field here changed. The three of them raised their feet and landed on this ball. They could walk effortlessly on it like they were walking on a flat surface. On the huge round ball, Luofu Heaven seemed to become a wall that was raised straight up. Of course, this wall was immeasurable in terms of length, width, and thickness. Such a strange sight was beyond imagination. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 604, Magnetic Hurricane. Qin Mu raised his head to look at Luofu Heaven. The pyramid-shaped sacrificial altars were erected on a place far away, and through the thin layer of fog, they could faintly see that sacrificial altar where Saint Woodcutter and Fu Riluo were at. Fu Riluo's heaven and earth were like an erected painting. There were many places that were black and white, having no other colors. When the volcanoes erupted, they were like fireworks during festive occasions, lighting up this painting of mountains and rivers so it was not too monotonous. They could still see the shattered pieces of the stars falling from the sky. Next, fire snakes began to hang down from the sky, and even though the speed looks very slow, it was actually scarily fast. The sacrificial altar that Saint Woodcutter and Fu Riluo were at was 1,000 miles away, and even if they saw it, it was just a tiny speck. Even though he could see that bright light and fog coming over there and the sacrificial altar looked small, the light was very intense, like a small sun that had suddenly risen. Its light was much stronger than the light of sun, and he could feel the piercing light all the way here. Meanwhile, the battle over at the Black Tiger God and Granny Sea was pretty magnificent. Every action from the four gods could be seen very clearly. Qin Mu stopped in his footstep. Jihuali and Qi Jiu stopped at the same time, and the three youths stood on this huge meteor and they looked around. The sky here was tall and the fog was faint. This made them felt carefree and relaxed. It was a rare place. Suddenly, a huge planet shifted over this side, and that planet looked to be very huge. It seemed like it could fall off any time. Wherever they passed by, the sky warped and the ground broke up continuously. Thousands of mountains and chasms appeared rapidly, and the sight was extremely terrifying. In the distance, the Black Tiger God, Granny Sea, Mu Tuluo and Yuluo Sha suddenly moved through the land that had risen up and began to fight each other fiercely. Does Jihuali know why Luofu Heaven had turned into such a state? Qin Mu asked curiously. Jihuali hesitated and said, "As for the specific cause, I had once heard Master Fu Riluo mentioned about it before. Master Fu Riluo said abnormal stars had suddenly appeared and stopped in the sky above Luofu Heaven, warping the space and creating a natural disaster. Ever since that day, Luofu Heaven was no longer fit for living. The abnormal stars, he said, were those broken planets in the sky. They looked abnormally huge from their angle, and they could even see the mountains on the planets clearly. Even though my master and I are from different races, I can feel his heart of a newborn that was homesick." He said solemnly, "I've heard Master Fu Riluo said that he wasn't the respectable king of the devil race originally. Back then, the respectable king had brought numerous devil gods to try and destroy the abnormal stars or to push them away from Luofu Heaven. However, there were many terrifying existences on the abnormal stars. After the respectable king and the devil gods went to the abnormal stars, they never came back. Master Fu Riluo said, after he went to the abnormal star, he discovered that they had all died in battle." Qin Mu was puzzled and said, "So why didn't Fu Riluo try to destroy these abnormal stars and instead spend 20,000 years to attack Supreme Emperor Heaven, causing so many devils and humans to die as a result?" Jihuali shook his head and said, "It's an important matter that must be kept secret, so he didn't speak in detail." Qin Mu looked at Qi Jui and he inquired, "Brother Qi, is a guest from the celestial heavens? Do you know anything about these abnormal stars?" Qi Jui was about to say something when that huge planet had already come to the sky above their head. The three of them instantly felt their body becoming lighter and they cussed in their hearts. Qin Mu hurriedly executed his sword pellet and the sword light was thick as a pillar. He stabbed down on the meteor under their feet and he tried to stabilize his footing. At the same time, Shahuali's demon knife also stabbed towards the meteor, and the shoes on Chiju's feet split apart as they transformed into bird claws to grab at the meteor. He tried to dig into the meteor so he doesn't get sucked away by the magnetic field of the abnormal planet. Next, cold sweat broke out on their heads. Qin Mu's sword light from the sword pellet was bounced back from the meteor. Shahuali's demon knife also couldn't stab into the meteor. Even though Chiju's bird claws were very powerful, the star was simply too hard and nearly broke his claws. Whoosh! The magnetic force formed sparks and hurricane like the aurora above the ice plains in the north of eternal peace. With a gentle sweep, the three of them flew up into midair involuntarily. The three youths weren't flustered in the face of danger, and they executed their own techniques and tried to escape out of this hurricane formed from this magnetic lightning. Qin Mu transformed into the form of Mars Sovereign that had a bull head and human body. As he stepped on the two fire dragons, the twin dragons brought him to rush out. Shahuali raised his knife and tens of thousands of knife light flickered, trying to break through the hurricane. On the other side, Chiju's body transformed into a 9-headed phoenix which flapped his wings to fly. His speed was extremely fast and even above Qin Mu and Shahuali. However, even though they were the top-notch experts of the younger generation, they also couldn't break free from this magnetic hurricane. They got brought into the sky by the hurricane and flew higher and higher. Brother Tiger's great idea, make us come to this meteor. We are too high up and we got caught by the magnetic force of the abnormal star. Cold sweat broke out on Qin Mu's forehead and he suddenly took a long breath, sweeping up all the air in the surroundings to contain them in his chest. Since he couldn't escape from the magnetic hurricane, he could only wait and see if this hurricane would weaken. There was no air in outer space, so he had to keep a mouthful of breath in his chest first. Luckily, his abilities weren't weak, so he could store even more air in his chest. This mouthful of air in his chest could ensure that he didn't need to breathe for a day. Even if he got sent to outer space, he could still protect his life. Qi Jui and Jahuali were also taking in breaths, and the two of them were also smarter than average. They quickly thought of the crux like how Qin Mu did. The magnetic hurricane swept them higher and higher while the meteor and Luofu heaven below went further and further away. Cold sweat rolled out Qin Mu's forehead, and that was because there were numerous lightnings swimming above their heads. Kacha! A bolt of heavenly lightning suddenly moved and struck towards him. Instantly, it was like a prodded hornet's nest as countless bolts of lightning suddenly appeared and formed a sea of heavenly lightning. Qin Mu threw away the sword pellet and flying swords danced around his body. Suddenly, they transformed into a 3 yards metal ball to cover Qin Mu inside, blocking out the lightning. Bolts of lightning bombarded on the sword pellet, and the sword pellet gave off creaking sounds as it got scorched red hot that it could melt any time. On the other side, Qi Jui and Jahuali weren't having it good as well. The heavenly lightning rolled and drowned out all three of them. After a moment, the lightning scattered and Qin Mu hurriedly kept his sword pellet. He saw that the magnetic hurricane was still around and it was still sweeping them like a long snake slithering. There were magnificent rays of light that spread wide and they could change into numerous kinds of colors every instant. Yet when Qin Mu raised his head, his heart sank. They had already left far away from Luofu heaven and entered the sky of the abnormal star. Crap! Qin Mu felt his scalp crawling. He suddenly saw the green and lush mountains on the abnormal star and he felt slightly at ease. Since there was greenery here, this meant that there should be air here. He just didn't know if the air was suitable for humans to breathe in. Whoosh! They got thrown out of the magnetic hurricane and the three of them tumbled out. They flew quite a distance before finally stabilizing in the air. Themselves. The three youths stood in the sky and looked at one another in dismay. Qi Jui's 9 heads swayed and they gradually shrunk back into his chest, leaving only one head which transformed back into a human shape. How can we get back to Luofu heaven? The three of them looked towards the direction of Luofu heaven and their scalp crawled. Luofu heaven has disappeared. That was right. Luofu heaven had vanished and only the dark space was left. The three of them looked at one another and they could see the fear and unease. The abnormal star was orbiting in the outer space of Luofu heaven, and no one knew when this star would orbit once more to the sky above Luofu heaven. Qin Mu quickly took out calculation spirit weapons and prepared to calculate the cycle of the stars. When he calculated when this abnormal star would reach Luofu heaven again, he was suddenly stunned. He raised his head to look towards the space, and the stars in the space were different from eternal peace. This also meant that what he learned from Tao sect was completely useless. He could rely only on observing the aspect of the celestial bodies moving along their course to calculate the path of this abnormal star. However, it would take a year at least to calculate it out. Qin Mu's heart turned cold. How long is 1 year on this abnormal star? Is it a few months of eternal peace? Or a few years, a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years? Qi Jui looked around and his eyes suddenly lighted up. He walked into the distance and said, "There are traces of battle there. It's best if we head there to take a look. Maybe we can find a method to leave." Qin Mu and Zhehuali hurriedly followed up, and they indeed saw astonishing ruins of battle, and those were purely battles between gods. There were mountaintops that were shaved flat, and there were lakes that had the shape of palms. There were huge-sized corpses of devil gods that collapsed left and right. The flesh had already decomposed, and only white bones were left. Far away, there was a huge shrine standing upright on a tall divine mountain. It was a dazzling sight and seemed to not be damaged at all. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He suddenly stopped in his footsteps and rushed into the sky. Zhehuali and Qi Jui saw this situation, and they also hurriedly rushed into the sky as well to look around in alert. "What danger has Brother Qin discovered?" Qi Jui narrowed his eyes and asked. Qin Mu didn't reply, and he looked down around the terrains from above. His heart trembled slightly. The terrain of his abnormal star was very familiar. He couldn't help thinking of that hall in the canyon outside the Permitha, Arkansas. The yellow sand that had flowed out from Founding Master's cauldron had transformed into numerous geographical maps. The terrain on this abnormal star was one of the geographical maps. There was the symbol of a shrine on the geographical map, so it should be the shrine on that divine mountain in front. Big Senior Brother has been here before. Could he be here? Qin Mu composed himself. Founding Master used the star sand in the cauldron to transform into numerous geographical maps, and the first map allowed Qin Mu to find Elder Qing Huang, who was hidden in great ruins, completely solving his problem with the writings of the dragon race. What would he find in this geographical map? "I may have made an error." Qin Mu blushed with shame, and he said to the two of them, "I still thought there was some remnant of a god's divine art. It's fine. Let us continue to head forward." Qi Jui and Zhehuali were skeptical, and Qi Jui gave a cough. "This place here is the abnormal star. No one will know what will happen. If Brother Qin discovered anything, it's best to be direct. Only by working together can we leave this place." Qi Jui looked at the divine mountain that was getting closer, and he was skeptical. Zhehuali's gaze flickered. "Has Brother Qi discovered anything? This mountain, do you find it familiar?" Qi Jui asked with a low voice. Zhehuali looked at this divine mountain, and his heart suddenly moved. He nodded his head. "It's very similar to that divine mountain in the celestial heavens. However, this mountain shouldn't be real." Qi Jui looked at Qin Mu, who was in front, and he revealed a smile. "Let's not tell him. Grasp it and victory is assured." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 605, Great Heavenly Cycle Stars Algebra. Qin Mu, Qi Jui, and Zhehuali came to the front of this divine mountain. This divine mountain was solemn and serene, emanating off an extraordinary grace. Rays of golden sunlight washed off the surroundings of the divine mountain and made them couldn't stop admiring the mountain. They didn't dare to just fly up. They chose to walk on foot. The stairs of this divine mountains reached straight up to the golden-roofed shrine. There must be a lot of bitter battles that had happened here, as the stone steps were all covered in splotches of blood. The blood had flowed down from the top, and it was very hard for the blood of God to dry up. Even after 10 to 20,000 years, they would still give off terrifying pulses, yet the God's blood and devil's blood here have already lost their essence. transforming into patches of brown bloodstains that were astonishing to see. What was strange was that there were no traces of battle here. Qin Mu executed carefree sword and slashed down on the divine mountain. Sparks flew in all direction and his hands were numb from the vibration. Yet no mark was left behind. There seemed to be a kind of indescribable power flowing in the mountain and protecting the divine mountain. Even the previous respectable king and numerous devil gods from Luofu heaven also couldn't leave any marks down after fighting their way here. What exactly is the origin of this mountain? Qin Mu was very puzzled. Xiaohuali and Qi Jui took a look at each other. They both understood each other and didn't say a word. Xiaohuali's gaze flickered and he thought to himself, even respectable king couldn't leave a mark before on this mountain. Is this mountain really fake? It doesn't seem like it. They continued forward and a corpse of a god appeared in front. There was no more flesh and blood. Qin Mu took quick steps and the clothes on this corpse had already decomposed. The blood and flesh had also rotted. The corpse had 3 neck bones, 3 skulls which faced 3 different directions. He had 6 arms and in each arm grabbed a divine weapon. A god that had died in battle. Qin Mu's eyes lighted up and he immediately grabbed towards one of the fierce tiger wine jars, but just as his palm touched this wine jar, the divine weapon suddenly turned into dust. Qin Mu was stunned. He saw that the skeleton that was holding onto the wine jar also continuously crumbling and soon, this entire skeleton shattered into powder. The other divine weapons also shattered into pieces and couldn't be swept up even if he wanted to. Xiaohuali walked over and said puzzled, could they have been shattered by his opponent? Qi Jui shook his head and he suddenly sliced his fingertips and dripped a drop of golden blood on the stone steps. His blood dried up quickly as though the essence in his blood were all sucked up by these stone steps. Qi Jui's expression became grim and he said solemnly, it was this divine mountain that had absorbed all his essence. Even the essence in the divine weapons couldn't be preserved. Qin Mu said seriously, Brother Qi, we are now swept onto the abnormal star at the same time. If you know anything, why don't you share it with us? We might find a way to leave here. The wound on the tip of Qi Jui's finger automatically healed and he shook his head to say with a smile, this is the first time I've come down to the lower bound. How would I know anything about this world? Brother Qin, stop joking. Qin Mu looked at the wound on his fingertip and he was astonished. His wounds automatically healing and didn't need medicine to heal. Was it the effect of his technique or was it the effect of his unique constitution? Xiaohuali was also astonished. In the battle in front of the god city in the painting, Qi Jui's injury was the most severe. Qin Mu had beat him up heavily and he even got stabbed by Qin Mu, almost dying in the process. Yet in just these few days, Qi Jui recovered back to normal and not only did his cultivation decrease, but it had also even surpassed what it was before. The 3 of them had their own intentions and they continued to head forward. On the stone steps were corpses of gods in all sizes. Some were from devil gods and some were gods. As long as the gods had 3 heads and 6 arms, their skeletons were nearly similar so they were from the same race. The essences in their corpses, divine weapons, and devil divine weapons were all absorbed by this divine mountain. Not a drop was left behind and just a light touch could turn them into dust. Xiaohuali examined the corpses of these 3-headed and 6-armed god and he frowned. He looked at Qi Jui and asked with a low voice, are these corpses from the god race in the celestial heavens? Qi Jui shook his head and said with a low voice, I don't know too. There are some 3-headed and 6-armed god, but they don't belong to a race. Furthermore, there are so many of them here so I don't think they are from the celestial heaven. This divine mountain. He shook his head. The one is the celestial heaven is then the real one. This should be a fake one, but why is this mountain so strong as well? He was slightly bewildered. The demon knife behind Xiaohuali opened its demon eye and it looked around. Even the demon eye couldn't see anything. What you mean is this divine mountain is real? How can that be possible? Xiaohuali said puzzledly. Qi Jui looked up and he saw Qin Mu walking very quickly, almost reaching the mountaintop. He said hurriedly, this divine mountain is strange. Let us go up too. If there any treasure, he will probably take it first. The 2 of them rushed hurriedly only to see Qin Mu standing at the end of the stone steps. The two of them came to his side in a hurry, and they saw a devil god standing in front of Qin Mu. His eyebrows were long and he grabbed a three-pointed double-edged knife, looking very awe-inspiring. The two of them raised their head and saw the face of the devil god projecting a natural dignity and power. He was looking down at them as though the three-pointed double-edged knife could slash down at them any moment. Qi Jiui and Zhehuali's body froze and they didn't dare to move. Qin Mu let out a shaky breath and moved his footstep to move to the side of this devil god. He saw another face. He walked one round around this devil god, and this devil god actually had 4 faces on his front, back, left, and right. He said with a smile, "Two senior brothers, there's no need to worry, he should be dead for a long time. When I just climb up here and saw the eyes of his back face staring at me, I was also frozen in shock and thought I was going to die in his hands." Qi Jiui and Zhehuali came back to their senses and they each let out a sigh of relief. Their bodies were filled with cold sweat. Zhehuali circled around and said in astonished, "For-faced devil god? Could he be the previous respectable king? Why is he standing here? He didn't enter the hall." Qin Mu examined in detail and said, "For faces, one more than Fu Riluo. Could it be the same technique as Fu Riluo? Fu Riluo has yet to cultivate to his level." Qi Jiui followed him to walk around this respectable king, and he examined carefully. It might not be so. Fu Riluo has ears at the back of his head, and he didn't have the 4th face. They should be from the same race but different breed. Fu Riluo's cultivation wouldn't be weaker than him. The wound is right here. He discovered something and he pointed at the neck of the 4-faced respectable king. Qin Mu looked over and he saw a fine red line that was hard to detect on the neck of the 4-faced respectable king. This respectable king should have suddenly suffered from a sneak attack when he fought his way here and got his neck smeared. Qin Mu opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of air to transform into wind. He blew at the head of the 4-faced respectable king. The head of this respectable rolled off his neck and smashed on the stone steps, breaking like porcelain. Next, the body of this respectable king was like a devil god statue made of porcelain. He quickly crumbled. His corporeal body was already emptied and the flesh and blood had already ceased to exist. Only his skin was left. That 3-pointed doubled edge blade had shattered into pieces. Qin Mu shuddered and he turned around to look at that shrine. The 4-faced respectable king had suffered from an attack just as he was about to step into this shrine and got his head severed, slaying his primordial spirit. At this moment, this shrine was right in front of them. The door opened and it was dim inside. From time to time, light would flow into his vision. Qi Jiui's gaze flickered and he said gently, "Brother Qin, are you going in? There might be danger inside." Qin Mu gritted his teeth and walked forward while saying solemnly, "Two senior brothers, I shall go in to scout first. If there's danger, I will inform you guys to immediately escape." Qi Jiui was astonished and he said to Zhehuali. Zhehuali revealed a look of astonishment at him. The two youths were puzzled. Qin Mu had really treated them as friends that had gone through life and death, and he was willing to put himself in danger? They didn't have much contact with Qin Mu, but they know that Qin Mu wasn't such a person. In front, Qin Mu walked into the shrine and his figure faded out. The light in the dim shrine was still flowing. Qi Jiui and Zhehuali looked nervously at the door of the shrine, and he listened to the movements inside carefully. Suddenly, an incomparably miserable shriek sounded out and the two of them felt their blood ran cold. Qin Mu's miserable shriek came from inside. "There's..." The voice was suddenly cut off. Whoosh! Qi Jiui and Zhehuali immediately rushed down the mountain. The two of them transformed into two flowing light that moved incomparably fast. They scaled up the mountain in an hour while they only took a few breaths' time to reach halfway down the mountain. Suddenly, Zhehuali stopped and said solemnly, "Brother Qi, stop. Something is wrong." Qi Jiui hurriedly stopped in his footsteps and turned around to reveal a bewildered look. Zhehuali sneered and said, "His scream was pretty energetic. How did he sound like a dying person? Furthermore, do you think a person that could kill the previous respectable king give him time to warn us?" Qi Jiui stared with his eyes wide open and he cried out, "What you mean is, let us go up quickly." The two of them quickly flew up the mountain and came to the front of the shrine. Shahuali took in a deep breath and slowly walked towards the shrine while holding his demon knife. Qi Jui followed behind him and his heads popped out from his neck. He looked around nervously. The two of them finally came to the door and one head of Qi Jui popped out from his shoulders while the other heads hid behind Shahuali. He looked into the shrine and he was stunned. They only saw Qin Mu in the shrine with a bunch of calculation tools to assemble them together. They formed a large-scaled calculation spirit weapon. Qi Jui gritted his teeth and pulled back his 9 heads. The 9 heads combined into one and he walked out from Shahuali's back, walking into the shrine. Shahuali also followed him to enter. The two youths sneered. Qin Mu raised his head and revealed a look of astonishment. He then smiled and said, "Two senior brothers have come right at the moment. I was about to tell you guys that there was a difficult algebra question in the shrine." Qi Jui sneered and he examined the shrine. He saw that the center of this shrine was a huge iron throne that was formed with swords and knife. A 3-headed and 6-armed god sat on the throne and 5 of his hands were grabbing onto an iron throne. The other hand was pointing in one direction. His 3 heads were faced in different directions and his mouth was wide open. His eyes were rounds from staring and he seemed to be giving out a heart-wrenching roar. What was even stranger was that the flesh and blood in his entire body dried up and he was like a dry corpse that was emaciated. The flesh and blood in his entire body were dried up and only his dry skin was stuck onto his bones. His eyes in the eye sockets were also dried out, sinking into his eye sockets. Only his black shriveled-up pupils could be seen. In front of this 3-headed and 6-armed god floated a small case. It was a jade case that wasn't very big and it floated silently. Trails of sunlight leaked out from the small case and swirled around the small case. Meanwhile, around the surroundings of the small case were grains of star-shaped sand of all sizes that were swirling around this small case. Meanwhile, this 3-headed 6-armed devil god was pointing at a mural and on the mural was a picture of a bunch of stars. Took up the entire wall. Qi Jui and Shahuali followed the direction of his finger and he realized where he was pointing was a stellar system. In the center of that stellar system was a picture of a land and on the land was still layers of heavens. The stars that are swirling around the small case is indeed an algebra question. Qi Jui examined carefully and he revealed an astonished expression. He cried out, "Great heavenly cycle stars algebra of the celestial heavens. Shahuali, have you learned this before in Spirit Elite Guards?" Shahuali nodded his head and his expression was grim. It was indeed the great heavenly cycle stars trajectory. Inside even contained a difficult algebra question which corresponded with the cycle of stars on the wall, forming a killing formation. As long as they solve this difficult problem, they will be able to enter the killing formation and take out this small case. The two of them hurriedly took out all kinds of calculation spirit weapons to rapidly calculate. At this moment, Qin Mu stood up and the huge calculation spirit weapons beside him flew back into his Taotai sack. "Senior brothers, there's no need to calculate, it's 33,000 years." Qin Mu walked forward and examined the heavenly cycle stars killing formation that shrouded the small case and said, "It's the star atlas of 33,000 years ago. It has slight difference from Eternal Peace's astronomical phenomenon. I'm ashamed to say it, but when I solved the question just now, I actually comprehended the true 14th sword for Tao sect from it." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 606 Dried Corpse of Crimson Light. In heavenly cycle stars killing formation, Qi Jui and Shahuali heard the voice of Qin Mu traveling over and they both coughed up blood. They didn't vomit blood because of Qin Mu. It was the sudden change in heavenly cycle stars killing formation which suddenly transformed into a resplendent Milky Way. The starlight pulled one another and connected with each other. The chains of starlight were formed by countless complicated divine arts runes, and they transformed into an activated killing formation which severely injured both of them at once. Meanwhile, looking from their angle, that small jade case in the center of the Milky Way had become a huge rectangular box that was hanging in the center of the Milky Way. It floated up and down in the galaxy and rays of sunlight also became incomparably thick, entwining mutually with the stars. This killing formation wasn't what they could defend against. 35,000 years. Is this number real or fake? The two of them coughed up huge mouthfuls of blood, and they each executed defensive methods while gritting their teeth. "No matter, we need to try everything we can. Their brains operated at full power and calculated the trajectory of the stars and starlights. They avoided the starlight chains and moved quickly. The killing formation gradually stopped and the stars in the surroundings returned back to their normal sizes, transforming back to grains to star sand that swirled slowly. Cold sweat rolled down Qijui and Zhihuali's forehead, and they looked at each other in the eyes. When they were about to rush into the center of the killing formation to seize the small case, Qin Mu was already there standing in front of it. Qijui panicked, and he was about to take a step forward when his qi and blood churned. He was astonished. He was injured just now, and he got grazed by a starlight chain just now. A huge wound opened up on his shoulder, yet this wound didn't heal automatically. Instead, fresh blood kept flowing out and balls of blood were floating towards that shriveled-up corpses on the Iron Throne. He hurriedly looked at Zhihuali. Zhihuali was also injured, and like him, he couldn't control his qi and blood as well. Fresh blood was also floating over to that dried corpse. The first droplet of blood landed in the mouth of the dried corpse. The surroundings suddenly became silent, so silent that it was slightly strange. "Yua work." A long howl suddenly came from the mouth of the dried corpses, and creaking sounds came right after. The both of them felt their hair standing on ends, and they hurriedly sealed the wound on their body. Yet they could still feel their vitality being drained. Something is strange. Zhihuali made a split-second decision, and he immediately moved back to rush out of the shrine. Qijui hesitated for a moment as he looked at Qin Mu, who was in the formation. He gritted his teeth and also retreated out from the shrine. The instant Qijui rushed out of the shrine, he swept his sleeve, and an ancient parasol tree emanated with golden flames to seal off the door. Zhihuali turned back and raised demon knife to slash down. The knife light instantly separated and covered the ancient parasol tree. The two of them rushed down the mountain like two furious dragons, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Qin Mu also felt his hair standing, and he hurriedly grabbed the small case to run out. Just now, when the qi and blood floating out from Zhihuali and Qijui's body flew towards the dried corpse and landed into the other two heads, creaking sounds also came from that two heads of that dried corpse. The three heads were slowly turning and looking over at him. In the eye sockets of his three heads, his shriveled eyes were slowly regaining blood and gradually bulging up. Qin Mu has already rushed out Heavenly Cycle Star's killing formation and came to the door of the shrine. An ancient parasol tree came smashing down at him. The one with the surname Qi. Qin Mu placed the small case under his armpit with one hand while his other hand grabbed his sword pellet. With a vibration, countless small flying swords came flying out and transformed into sword-treading mountains and rivers, colliding with this ancient parasol tree. Qijui had executed this great divine art in a hurry, so the power of the ancient parasol tree wasn't very strong. It was only enough to block him for a moment, and if it was a complete move, even Qin Mu would have to execute Calamity Sword to deal with it. Sword-treading mountains and rivers attacked over and severed the ancient parasol tree, breaking through Qijui's divine arts, paths, and skills. Yet knife light came pouncing in his face and broke sword-treading mountains and rivers. Zhihuali! Qin Mu was furious, and he avoided the blades of this move from Zhihuali. Turning around and swinging his sword, the second form of Dao sword, binding of 5 qi and 3 eons, erupted, breaking Zhihuali's move. There was no more divine art blocking the door of the shrine. Qin Mu squat, and his legs burst forth with strength to eject forward. With a loud boom, the air in front of his compressed into a wall which split straight afterward. Qin Mu's body soared into the air as he rushed out of the door to the shrine. A smile gradually bloomed on his face. Yet, his body was suddenly frozen in the air. Before the smile on Qin Mu's face could fully bloom, it vanished and slowly turned into fear. His feet were floating backward, and he couldn't touch the ground. No matter how he executed his divine art, there was no use. Qin Mu tidied his clothes in the air, and he carried the small case in his hands respectfully. When his feet finally touched the ground, Qin Mu immediately raised the jade case high above his head and said solemnly, "Spare my life, Senior." His hands became lighter as the small case flew up. Qin Mu sneaked a glance and saw that jade case landing in front of that 3-headed and 6-armed dried corpse. "Yua work." That dried corpse wasn't really a dried corpse. Instead, his qi and blood were dried up and his vitality was drained, as a result, turning him into the state that was neither dead nor alive. When Qin Mu and the rest arrived, Qi Jui and Jihuali got injured and delivered fresh blood to his mouth. This was just barely enough to reignite his life force again. Blood-curdling sounds came from his throat as he seemed to be adjusting the functions of his corporeal body. Creaking sounds also came from his body as though his bones were colliding. Water or blood? Qin Mu hurriedly took out a water pouch and offered it up respectfully. Ever since the incident in the flaming desert of West Earth, he always had to put some water pouches in his Taotai sack to store clean water. That dried corpse raised his hand with difficulty and it was very slow. "Senior, let me do it." Qin Mu went forward and opened up the water pouch politely to place beside the mouth of that dried corpse. After that dried corpse finished drinking one water pouch, his right head gave off a raspy voice, "Water!" Qin Mu took out another water pouch and put it to his mouth. Once he finished drinking, he took out the third pouch to put it at the mouth of his left head. The left head of this corpse drank the water with difficulty. Qin Mu sneaked a glance and his heart was astonished. He saw that the two heads that had drunk the water slowly bulging up with flesh and blood. There seemed to be qi and blood flowing in his body. Not only that, his blood vessels were like dry, cracked land receiving the sweet droplets of rain. Soon, there was sound of blood flowing in his blood vessels. This dried corpse. No, it's not a dried corpse. It should be a strong practitioner from 35,000 years ago. He had cultivated a kind of strange technique which allowed him to sink into a state of feigned death, so he wouldn't be absorbed by this divine mountain. This technique is pretty marvelous and abnormal, Qin Mu thought to himself. The faces of that dry corpse slowly bulged and he could gradually see some outline of his facial features. It wasn't just skins and bones like just now. However, his corporeal body must have been way too exhausted, so he couldn't regain his original appearance by just drinking water. However, he could still see that he's a middle-aged man. "Senior." Qin Mu was about to say something when he saw that three-headed and six-armed opening his eyelids. In his eye sockets, his eyes were gradually swelling up. Soon, the white and black of the eyeball could be seen clearly. "Which year is it now?" that man said weakly as he raised one hand to grab the small case, placing it on his knees. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment and said, "Now is the year of eternal peace. As for what is the exact year, I'm not too clear." Eternal peace? That three-headed and six-armed man wanted to get up, but he couldn't get up. He asked while gasping for his breath, "Shouldn't it be founding emperor? Could founding emperor era has also died out?" Qin Mu said honestly, "It had died out 20,000 years ago. Senior, you should have sunk into hibernation 20,000 years ago, and once you woke up, it has already been 20,000 years later. Why did Senior come to the territory of the devil race? This is Luofu heaven of the devil race, and this is the reason why the devil race is facing destruction, and thus, they had invaded Supreme Emperor Heaven. Senior's planet." That three-headed and six-armed man panted heavily. "I'm one of the survivors of Crimson Light era, and I have hid left and right for countless years. Because we wanted to return to our country, we rushed over from our hiding place and planned to return to the ancestral land of Crimson Light. When we were on our way, we heard it was founding Emperor era now, and when we encountered enemies, we had no choice but to escape to this place." "Enemies?" Qin Mu was stunned. That three-headed and six-armed man said calmly, "The enemies that destroyed my Crimson Light era. Founding Emperor era has also been wiped out. It should be the same group of people." I even heard that there's a high Emperor era before founding Emperor era." He shook his head. "I'm a Crimson Light God race of Qi Ming era. My name is Qi Shi. I was originally the execution supervisor of Crimson Light celestial heavens, controlling the authority of life and death. Any god that has commit crimes would find it hard to escape death on god execution stage." Qin Mu cried out, "In that case, this divine mountain. This mountain isn't a mountain. It's god execution stage." This three-headed and six-armed man named Qi Shi paused and took in a breath. Executing gods on the god execution stage, This stage has already absorbed the blood of countless gods that had committed crimes, and as time goes by, great curse would be raised and even I would receive the drawback. When I fought with the devils, I got injured, so God execution stage started to absorb me. I had no choice but to seal myself and go into hibernation. Come help me up. Qin Mu walked forward and supported him. Qi Shi's palm clasped onto his shoulder where it was near the neck, and he stood up shakily. Qin Mu resisted the pain and said, "Senior, you are hurting me." Qi Shi didn't seem to hear him and pressed his shoulder to walk to the front of the mural. He examined the starry sky in the mural and muttered, "Ancestral land. Ancestral land is right here. I have yet to die. I can still return. They must be waiting for me to report back to them. Do you know? The reason why this God execution stage is so demonic is because it's actually forged with the God execution stage in Celestial Palace's divine treasure. It belongs to a strong practitioner of Emperor's throne." Qin Mu was astonished and he muttered, "Strong practitioner of Emperor's throne." A pain came from his shoulder. Qi Shi's fingernails have already stabbed into his skin, and Qin Mu could feel his blood flowing out. His vitality and blood were flowing into Qi Shi's body. Qi Shi's face gradually regained some color and his breath also became slightly more stable. He chuckled and said, "That's right. This is the small case that controls the God execution stage. Once this small case is opened, you almost seized this small case away." Qin Mu was slightly dizzy, and it was a sign of losing too much blood. His gaze flickered and he said, "Senior, I'm really hurting. I'm bleeding. God execution stage is starting to absorb my qi and blood." Qi Shi's face slowly bulged out as flesh and blood grew. He said with smile, "You are indeed bleeding, but it isn't God execution stage that had absorbed your blood. The water I've drunk cannot replenish my qi and blood. I've exhausted too much and I need someone's blood." Cough, cough, cough. He suddenly coughed loudly. "What happened to Senior?" Qin Mu asked concernedly. "Senior, are you okay? Do you feel giddy? Is your throat itchy?" Qi Shi subconsciously let go of him and raised his forearms to smack his head forcefully. His body swayed and his other two hands gripped onto the small case. Qin Mu said with a concerned and nervous face, "Senior, are you dehydrated? I still have some water here. Does Senior want to take a drink?" I've forgotten. I have added some extra ingredients in these water pouches." Qin Mu stomped his feet and said, "What should I do?" He turned around to walk to and fro. Qi Shi grabbed at him and missed, crashing onto the ground with a kneel. "Some water pouches have been added with blood-dissolving powder by me." Qin Mu smacked his fist on his palm and gave a long sigh. "This kind of poison will dissolve blood when coming into contact with the blood. It's used for me to get rid of the corpses. How could I have forgotten? Senior, are you okay?" Qi Shi knelt there without moving. His eyes slowly rotated toward him. Qin Mu avoided his gaze and took over the small case that he was holding. "Senior's cultivation is strong, so you can definitely detox this poison, right? In that case, I won't be disturbing you. Farewell." After saying that, he slipped away. Qi Shi's eyeballs rolled over and divine light shot out from his eyes, boring 2 holes in this shrine. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 607, God Execution, Mysterious Knife. Qin Mu rushed out of the shrine and came onto the steps of the divine mountain. He immediately proned and his body hid under the stone steps. The 2 thick beams of light swept past his head, and the stone steps on the divine mountains were scorched red. Qin Mu waited for these 2 beams of divine light to sweep past and landed on the few stone steps below. Only then did he rose and ran like a furious dragon, leaving a trail of smoke. As he sprinted quickly, he executed his vital qi to create fog behind him, covering the entire mountain with fog. However, from the wound on his neck, qi and blood were leaking out. They were guided out from his body and poured towards the mountain. The wound was created when Qi Shi stabbed his neck with his fingernails. On this God execution stage, any small injury cannot heal by themselves or be treated with medicine. Qi and blood would be absorbed by God execution stage, and the only way out was to quickly leave the mountain while one was still alive. The qi and blood in Qin Mu's body were losing at an extremely fast rate. He didn't dare to turn back and look if his qi and blood were being absorbed by God execution stage or qi shi. He could only grit his teeth and sprint down. Finally, when he rushed into the bottom of the mountain, his brain was already blank because of the lack of blood. When he heard thunder rumbling beside his ears and his eyes were seeing pitch black, Qin Mu's primordial spirit projected out and he used it to look around. He quickly took out the dragon's saliva from his Taotai sack to smear on his neck. Next, he took out spirit Buddha pills which could replenish his blood and consume them quickly. He touched his body and his heart was astonished. In just this short moment, he had already become as thin as a match and needed some time to recover. God execution stage and qi she seized his qi and blood together, so it was already a remarkable feat that he wasn't squeezed dry. I wonder if qi she had to do anything with my qi and blood flowing out so fast. Qin Mu was as thin as bamboo and he placed the small case under his armpit. He walked forward shakily and left the strange divine mountain as far as possible. He thought to himself, my blood-dissolving powder is placed in the water. He first absorbed Shahuali and Chijui's blood, using their blood to awaken himself before using that 3 pouches of water to hydrate himself. Blood-dissolving power should have traveled to all parts of his corporeal body with the water. He sucked my blood so it would dissolve with the blood he had seized. He relied on blood awakened so when the blood is dissolved, he will go dormant again. However, if Qi Shi had taken precautions, he could have left behind a portion of clean blood. He was a great professional in the healing path and the poison path. He knew how to keep a portion of clean blood and he also knew where Qi Shi had kept the portion of clean blood. It was in Qi Shi's eyes, that pair of eyes that had shone off with divine light. He should only have clean blood in that pair of eyes. Therefore, Qin Mu didn't know whether Qi Shi would fall into slumber once again. Therefore, he needs to leave this divine mountain fast. If he was clever enough, he would have to force out the excess water in his body and cause himself to completely shrivel up. He could then use the remaining blood in his eyes to help him stand up. Qin Mu executed his remaining vital qi to catalyze the spirit Buddha pills in his body, and he thought to himself, hope he isn't so clever. In the shrine, Qi Shi knelt there motionlessly like a wooden sculpture. The fingertips of his 6 arms were leaking out murky water, and that stream was very fine. There was a milky-colored spoiled blood mixed with the water. Qin Mu's blood-dissolving powder couldn't dissolve his divine blood. What it dissolves was the blood he had absorbed from Qijui, Shahuali, and a portion from Qin Mu. After some time, the water in Qi Shi's body had been drained out and he turned into a 3-headed and 6-armed dried corpse. He was extremely terrifying, but there was a glint that was flowing in the eyes of the front face. Qi Shi carefully separated a portion of blood from his eye and he let this bit of blood activate some of his bodily functions. He stood up shakily. His 2 heads hung down and his 6 arms also hung down weakly. The blood in his eyes was too little so he could only maintain very little bodily function. His other body function could only remain dormant. He moved out of the hall with difficulty, and he only came to the stone steps of this shrine after a long time. His legs buckled, and he tumbled down the divine mountain. His speed couldn't chase up to Qin Mu, Shahuali, and Chijui's running speed, so he took an hour to roll down from the top of the mountain to the bottom. Qi Shou rested for a long time before climbing up. He moved his body with difficulty to look or water. Qin Mu was at a lake far away and he took out bags of blood-dissolving powder to pour into the lake. He saw him walking over shakily and hurriedly poured the rest of the powder into the lake. He executed a divine art and a cloud appeared above the lake. From the cloud, a divine dragon hung down and stabbed its tail into the lake to stir vigorously. Qin Mu waved his hand and sprinted away. Qi! 2 beams of light shot out from Qi Shi's eyes, but he missed him. He could only look at him moving far away. Water! Qi Shi was angered and he walked shakily. His body couldn't hold up any longer and collapsed on the ground. So close yet so far. He had finally crawled here with difficulty, yet the lake was poisoned by Qin Mu. If he wanted to find another water source, he will probably have to take 1 to 2 months. If his luck was bad, he might even need to spend 1 to 2 years. At this moment, rumblings of thunder came from the sky. The rolling thunder shocked Qi Shi awake and he flipped over with difficulty. Raising his head at the sky, The mouths on his 3 heads opened up as he waiting for the rain to fall in delight. Dark clouds filled the sky and lightning crossed. The dark clouds became thicker and lower. On a mountain far away, fire dragons suddenly flew up into the clouds and chased away the rainwater. After a moment, the sky turned clear and blue. The dark clouds transformed back into white clouds to float away. She turned his head around with difficulty, and 2 beams of divine light shot out, piercing 2 holes into that mountaintop. If I find you, on the other side, Qin Mu immediately went down the mountain after chasing away the rain clouds. That mountaintop behind had already suffered for no reason, causing 2 holes to be blown up in it. He has already mostly recovered, but his corporeal body still has yet to recover back to his peak. It probably wouldn't rain for a moment. I should be safe for some time to recuperate and study the use of this small case. He transformed into a black shadow to stick to the ground, covering his traces to leave this place as far as possible. He tried his best not to leave any trace so that after she woke up after it rained, he wouldn't be able to find where he was hiding in a short time. After a long time, Qin Mu came out from his shadow state and he revealed his form. He lifted up the small case to slowly study. This small case was the central administration of God execution stage, and on the small case was imprinted with all kinds of markings. It was extremely ancient. It should be the rune markings of Crimson Light era, and they were different from the rune markings now. The paths, skills, and divine arts of Crimson Light era should be different from now. Qin Mu examined in detail and he tried to solve the marvel of these rune markings. However, he had never come into contact with the runes of Crimson Light era, so he knew absolutely nothing about it. He could only give up. The surroundings of the small case also have some faintly discernible sunlight that swirled around the small case. This sunlight was harmless. Qin Mu had tried it with his spirit weapon before he even took the small case. The sunlight had no power, so it should only be the light given off by a treasure in the small case. The case wasn't locked, but it was shut tightly. There was no place to pry it open. No matter how much Qin Mu tried to open the small case, he couldn't even leave any mark on the case, even with carefree sword. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps rang out and a familiar voice entered Qin Mu's ears. Brother Qin sure is remarkable, to be able to escape even in that kind of situation. I really admire you. Qin Mu placed the small case under his armpits and turned around. He looked at Qi Jui with a face full of smile. Even though Qi Jui still had an elegant demeanor, he still had a portion of qi and blood stolen by the Divine Mountain and Qi Shi. However, compared to the bony Qin Mu, he still has some blood and flesh. Qin Mu first got his qi and blood seized by Qi Shi, then by the Divine Mountain afterward. Thus his body was overexhausted. Qi Jui and Jihuali had nearly killed him by trapping him in that shrine for a short while, so the qi and blood he had exhausted was even more than the both of them. This time, Qi Jui seemed to be well prepared. An ancient parasol tree stood tall behind him and flames spread out in all directions. The phoenix nest on the tree was made from golden rice straws and branches of a parasol tree. The nest was shining brilliantly in gold, and a 9-headed phoenix was resting in the nest. The 9 phoenix heads were spewing fire to temper its own body. His great divine arts has already accumulated its power. Where is senior brother Jihuali? Qin Mu looked around and asked. Qi Jui said indifferently, he challenged me and got heavily injured by me, so he had no choice but to run. Brother Qin, you probably don't recognize the small case, right? Why don't I help you solve your question? Qin Mu said solemnly, I'm all ears. I don't know how did Crimson Light Celestial Heavens call this small case 35,000 years ago, but in our celestial heavens, this small case has a very famous name. It's called God Execution Mysterious Knife. Qi Jui stabilized himself, and the 9-headed phoenix on the ancient parasol tree also raised its head to look at Qin Mu. Qi Jui's gaze landed on the small case and he said, as for what the small case is used to store, Brother Qin wouldn't know if you aren't an official in the celestial heavens. This kind of small case is normally used to store human head. Human head? Qin Mu was astonished and shook the case. There was no sound of a human head tumbling around. Qi Jui raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, to put the head of a strong practitioner on Emperor's throne, using it as a knife to execute gods. Brother Qin doesn't know how to open this case. You can give it to me. I can open it up to show Brother Qin. Qin Mu offered the case forward with both hands and said sincerely, "There you go." Qi Jui's gaze landed on the small case and he took in a long breath. The ancient parasol tree behind him also floated up as he executed Emperor's throne technique. Qin Mu let go of the case and the case fell to the ground. On the palm under the case was a sword pellet that was currently swirling. Qi Jui retreated and his body passed through the ancient parasol tree. The tree grew furiously until it was 50 yards tall. The nine-headed phoenix on the tree screeched and flapped its wings to attack Qin Mu like a beam of light. Twang! His sword light suddenly became incomparably bright and Calamity Sword suddenly erupted to face the nine-headed phoenix. In an instant, flames overshadowed the sunlight in the sky. Sword and fire exploded among the mountains, and they expanded furiously like a small sun and an incomparably bright ball. Qi Jui erupted and he struck forward with a phoenix mudra. The ancient parasol tree followed right behind the nine-headed phoenix and destroyed everything in its way as it came smashing down. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 608 Following a Set Pattern. Qin Mu's opening Calamity Sword clashed with the nine-headed phoenix. The power of these two great divine arts wasn't much inferior from each other. The sword of opening Calamity Sword pierced through the phoenix instantly exploded, having 8,000 swords each dealing with the countless divine arts in the nine-headed phoenix. Yet at this moment, the ancient parasol tree came smashing over. With flailing branches and sunlight bursting forth in all directions, the power of opening Calamity Sword withered from the collision. Qin Mu moved back and pulled out his sword. He executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique and 8 roars of a dragon came from his body. The vibrations from 8 voices of ancestral dragon instantly turned his withered chi and blood become incomparably thick in an instant. In Qin Mu's body, his divine treasures suddenly reversed as he changed the divine treasures of the God path to the divine treasures of the devil path. His spirit embryo, 5 elements, 6 directions, 7 stars were all flipped, resulting in the divine treasures of the God path to be below and the divine treasures of the devil path to be above. The primordial spirit combined from his spirit embryo and soul descended onto the spirit embryo divine treasure of the devil path and stood tall on the devil land. The devil land beneath his feet was the 6 directions land that was formed by his spirit platform of the devil path. What was shining brightly in the sky were his devil sun, devil moon, and the 5-element devil gods that stood tall on the devil palace on the 5-element stars. The instant Qin Mu pulled back his sword, he stabbed out once again and it was still the first form of Calamity Sword, opening Calamity. The ball of light that was formed from their earlier collision swelled up once more, but this time, there was also black-colored sword light mixed within it. Streaks of sword light that were black like ink spread out from the core of the ball of light, tainting the ball of light in a split second. Both of their divine arts were nearly wiped out completely. Before the power given off by light in the surroundings could even explode in time, countless trees in the valley had already fallen. With the ball of light as the center of a circle, they collapsed in all directions. Pieces of mountain rocks floated into the air, and they were flying in all directions at an astonishingly high speed. In the light, Qin Mu moved back and he pulled his sword out for the second time. Qi Jui stepped forward once more and his hands clasped together. The phoenix nest on the tree suddenly flew out as the golden rice straws and parasol tree branches rushed at Qin Mu. Qin Mu pulled out his sword and gave a jolt. The 8,000 swords suddenly combined and fused into one, transforming into Carefree Sword that was in his hand. With flashing sword lights, he came face to face with the golden rice straws and parasol tree branches. A kind of Tao charm that was close to the path appeared on his body, and the sword in his hand was like symbols of numerals that was constantly changing. The 14th writing of Tao Sword. Tao nourishes the earth of all heavens, giving birth to all laws, and the whole world will return to one. Not even old Tao master of Tao sect had completely comprehended this move, and he had only succeeded in cultivating half of it. Even so, that incomplete form was already enough to be called the only God writing of sword skill in eternal peace. It wasn't because old Tao master didn't have the aptitude or comprehension, it was just because Tao sword involved the mathematical transformation of all things in heaven and earth. If there was a mistake, Tao sword couldn't be cultivated. And since the sun, moon, and stars in eternal peace were all fake, There were incomparably fine mistakes in the heavenly cycle star's algebra. By using mistakes to comprehend the 14th writing, it was natural he couldn't do it. Qin Mu had also learned the 14th writing of Dao Sword, and his attainment in algebra was already extremely high. The reason why he could easily comprehend the 14th writing wasn't because his aptitude and comprehension were better than old Dao Master. It was because he had seen the star atlas from 35,000 years ago and also studied the star formation that Founding Master had left behind to protect God Execution Mysterious Knife. With that, only then was he able to comprehend the marvel of the 14th writing. At the same time, he calculated the method to solve the killing formation. When the whole world returns to one was executed, none of his cultivation was touched and none of his vital chi was exhausted. The power of heaven and earth was borrowed by his sword skill, and with the flashing sword light, it destroyed the golden rice straws and parasol tree branches that were flying over. He had executed Calamity Sword twice to break Qi Jui's great divine art, so his vital chi was also greatly exhausted. The 14th writing of Dao Sword didn't have higher power than Calamity Sword and was even slightly inferior, but to Qin Mu, that was the best choice. The power from the sword, golden rice straws, and parasol tree branches exploded, and Qin Mu advanced instead of falling back. Rushing straight at Qi Jui, his corporeal body suddenly grew drastically as the muscles of his body bulged. Countless fine sword light flew out from the carefree sword in his hand and transformed into a pig slaughtering knife. The knife was 5 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was like holding a small piece of a door as Qin Mu wielded the knife. This pig slaughtering knife separated into two, and he held them in both hands like 2 pieces of a door. Qi Jui moved back and didn't get close to him. Suddenly, a pair of phoenix wings appeared behind him and slashed repeatedly. He didn't have much magic power left, and he had been preparing his great divine art for a long time. However, it took a long time to execute this move, so the exhaustion was too huge. For him to withstand 2 opening calamity from Qin Mu and even block Qin Mu's 14th writing of Dao Sword, it was already quite a remarkable feat. Among the current younger generation in this world, he was definitely the first to make Qin Mu fight until this extent. This power of his phoenix wings was not ordinary. Qin Mu came pouncing over like a whirlwind, and his pig slaughtering knife slashed up and down to have knife light coiling around his body. He executed Butcher's knife skills, and his footwork was Cripple's heaven-pilfering divine legs, making him come and go unpredictably. The ultimate arts of Cripple and Butcher had perfectly fused into one on his body. Meanwhile, when Qi Jui spread and folded his wings, countless feathers flew out like swords to collide with pattering. His sword skill latched on to every opportunity as they rushed at Qin Mu's knife skill. What his phoenix feathers executed was sword skills, and what his wings executed was knife skills. He was truly skilled in both sword and knife. His attainment on battle techniques was no weaker than Qin Mu. The two of them fought fast with fast, and the 2 knives were sometimes left and sometimes right. His knife was like whirlwind, and sometimes it was like a huge wave crashing down with the sun shining on the wave of the East Sea. Sometimes it was like a long knife hanging over the moon, fast like a meteor. He overwhelmed Qi Jui all the way and forced him to move back continuously. Whoosh! The 2 pigs slaughtering knife suddenly shrunk, and flying swords flew out of the knives like small silver fishes. They flew in the air and moved to and fro like lightning. These several hundred swords were like invisible sword skill expert grabbing onto the treasure swords, attacking Qi Jui from all angles. Village Chief's sword skill was also executed by Qin Mu. Qi Jui gave a long screech, and the head on his neck suddenly exploded to split into 9 heads. The plumes on his 9 heads shook, and balls of light instantly shone down, hitting the flying swords off the sky. Qi Jui's 9 heads pecked down, and Qin Mu's knife was 1 vertical and 1 horizontal. Right as they were about to slash down on the phoenix heads, Qi Jui suddenly welcomed it with his wings. Qin Mu's pig slaughter knives slashed on his wings and were embedded in his bones, unable to be pulled out. Qi Jui's phoenix heads first pecked down before aiming straight down on Qin Mu's chest. The beaks opened up and balls of light were accumulating. Qin Mu suddenly pulled out his knives, and 1 knife slashed the throat while the other slashed into the phoenix's mouth. Meanwhile, the 2 pig slaughtering knives that was embedded in Qi Jui's wings had become 2 flying swords that still remained embedded there. These two pig-slaughtering knives were formed by 8,000 swords, and they were originally individual bodies to begin with. What was embedded in Qijui's wings were the blades of two swords. Leaving behind these two swords, the other flying swords can still be used to form two pig-slaughtering knives. The throat that got hit by the knife was suddenly pulled back by Qijui to suppress the body of this knife, making it unable to sever his throat. At the same time, this beak shut to bite down on the blade of the other knife. Qin Mu pulled his knives out again, and Qijui could only bite onto a flying sword. He saw the two knives of Qin Mu slashing over at another beak and head of his, and it was literally following a set pattern, slashing towards his second neck and head. Qijui had no choice but to open his mouth to bite onto the knife and used his neck to brace the knife. Qin Mu pulled out his knives and left another two flying swords in his wound. He still slashed his two pig-slaughtering knives to his third head and third neck. Qijui was furious. "Would you cut it out already?" Even when he said so, he had no choice but to bite the knife again and use his neck to lock the pig-slaughtering knife. Qin Mu pulled his knives out again and left the swords behind, slashing towards his fourth head and fourth neck. Qijui clenched his sharp claws in anger, and his four heads were all bloody. It would be lying if he said it wasn't painful. The pain coming from all four heads struck deep into his soul and right down to his bone marrows. "Aye!" Qin Mu pulled out the knives and cut him off, slashing again for the fifth time. Qijui's fury couldn't be contained, and he bit down on the knife again. Qin Mu pulled out his knives again, and even though Qijui couldn't resist his anger, he could only bite the knife once more. In an instant, all 8 phoenix heads and necks of Qijui were hanging with swords. "The one with the surname Qin, you have infuriated me. Don't underestimate the paths, skills, and divine arts of the celestial heavens. Cry of the phoenix in 9 heavens." The last phoenix head of Qijui cried out, and the phoenix cry reached straight into the sky. The cry of the phoenix bounced back and forth in the sky and transformed into a cloud. Next, God's voice began to reverberate in the clouds as though there were tens of thousands of gods chanting. With the blessing of 10,000 gods, rays of light shone down onto Qijui's body from that cloud. Qijui was covered with golden light, and that last phoenix head pecked down. Qin Mu did the same thing, and Qijui didn't dodge at all. He faced his knife light head-on, and his beak was split open and the blood vessels on his neck were severed. Yet, the golden light that scattered on his body allowed him to take Qin Mu's knife down by brute force, stabbing his beak fiercely into Qin Mu's chest. Qin Mu flew back and tumbled on the ground. He propped himself with his knife and stopped. Qijui was covered entirely in gold, and he flapped his wings to fly over. His 9 heads shook and the flying swords fell to the ground. The 9-headed phoenix gradually returned to his human form, and the golden wings behind his body had also vanished. "Qin Fengqing, fix!" Qijui sneered and raised up a mirror to shine at Qin Mu. He said indifferently, "The son of Yudu sealed by earth count. Do you really think I'm not your match? I'm merely following orders to seize you and not take your life. Instead, I should shatter your seal and release the true you. This mirror is made by Black Deity who controls the heavens in the north of the celestial heavens. It is specially used to fix you in place. You aren't bad to have injured me. Fix me in place? Let me take a look." Qin Mu stretched his hands out to grab at this mirror, and Qijui was astonished. The mirror was seized from his hands, and what came towards him was a huge, sparkling, clean knife that slashed on his head. Qijui felt pain, and his brain was almost shattered with one knife. He had no choice but to reveal his true form, which was a 9-headed phoenix. On each head hung a pig slaughter knife that was probably already shattered into his brain. Qijui flapped his wings and wanted to escape, yet Qin Mu was a step faster and had already jumped onto his back. As he punched this 9-headed phoenix, he connected all his strikes and caused the feathers to fly all around. Below, an injured Jehuali walked over with quick steps and picked up the small case. He revealed a look of delight, but when he looked up and saw Qin Mu riding the phoenix, he couldn't help showing an astonished look. Brother Qin is truly powerful to be able to suppress Qijui. His abilities are indeed a line higher than mine. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. I'm then the oriole. Now the case is in my hands. My God Execution Mysterious Knife will be able to bring my knife skills one more step forward. Right? Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 609 Hot Potato. Shahuali's gaze flickered. He examined the case and tried to open the small case, but the gap was tightly sealed. There was no place to pry open the case. Even if he used his demon knife to slash, he couldn't leave any mark. Cold sweat broke out on Shahuali's forehead as he tried all kinds of divine arts to break the seal. He even used the divine arts of the devil path that Fu Riluo had taught him once, and he still couldn't open the case. He raised his head and saw phoenix feathers floating down the air like falling leaves in autumn. However, they weren't withered leaves, they were blood-red maple leaves. Qin Mu was riding Qi Jui in the air and plucking his feathers, beating him until he was completely covered in blood. Qi Jui was also extremely fierce. Even though he had gotten slashed on his 9 heads, he twisted his neck over to spew out trails of mysterious lights to slash at Qin Mu. Qin Mu just focused on hammering him, and the pig-slaughtering knife on the phoenix head suddenly flew out, leaving only 9 flying swords still stuck in the heads. The other flying swords executed sword treading mountains and river, forming a painting of mountains and rivers in front of Qin Mu, allowing the 9 heads to strike freely. The painting didn't break at all. Qin Mu's hammering was simply too ruthless. He didn't purely use corporeal body divine arts. Instead, he used divine arts like yin-yang heaven flipping hands and 5 thunder heaven raising bell. Tens of thousand stars even appeared behind him from time to time as he executed great overarching heavenly stars palm force. Any kind of divine arts was like mountain splitting apart, and it wasn't only divine arts of the God path. Qin Mu would even execute strange and sinister divine arts of the devil path from time to time. Even though the power wasn't as strong as the divine arts of the God path, and the reason should be because he didn't spend too much effort on the divine art, the divine arts of the devil path could target Qi Jui's corporeal body and corrode his corporeal body, corrode his primordial spirit, and hugely weaken the resistance of his corporeal body. This was the most terrifying. Shahuali saw all of these and he couldn't help shuddering. If these divine arts from Qin Mu hit his body, his flesh would probably split open and his primordial spirit would probably be destroyed in just a few moves. His corporeal body would probably turn into mush. Qi Jui didn't even die after getting beaten up like this. He's indeed stronger than me. His corporeal body has a kind of strange self-repair ability for him to last even longer. However, he would be beaten to death by Qin Mu not long later. If Qi Jui die and I can't open this case to get God Execution Mysterious Knife, the next one Qin Mu would kill will be. Shahuali took in a deep breath and soared into the air. He pulled out the demon knife from his back and threw it into the air. The demon knife suddenly vibrated in the air, and a huge demonic eye appeared behind it. With the appearance of this demon eye, knife light shone into this eye, and knife light instantly filled the whole sky, flooding toward Qin Mu and Qi Jui. His long knife was broad and powerful. Shahuali's knife skills were different from Butcher's 9 skills of Heaven Knife. 9 skills of Heaven Knife walked the righteous path, and it wasn't proficient in calculation. However, it sought an overwhelming, righteous, and boundless power, transforming the brilliance of literary hero into knife light to execute them out. Shahuali's knife skill was mostly inherited from Luo Wushuang, whose knife skills were skilled in calculation. It was slightly similar to Dao Sek's Dao Sword. However, Dao's sword used algebra to calculate the Great Dao, while Divine Knife Luo's knife skills used rules to establish the Great Dao. This was the biggest difference between the two. Shahuali raised his knife and he laughed. "Senior brothers, let's just forget today's matter. Let me help to resolve both of your conflicts. We are all residing together in a different star, so we should get along and think of a way to leave. Why are we fighting among one another?" Even though he had said so, his knife skill didn't have any intention of stopping the conflict. Most of the power from the knife skill was placed on Qin Mu's body, and the knife light that landed in Qi Jui stopped when it was enough. After all, Qi Jui was severely injured. If he gave him another knife, he might not be able to withstand it. On the other hand, Qin Mu was still vigorous, so he needed to beat down Qin Mu and make him fall back by showing him trouble. His knife light rushed over, and Qin Mu immediately stretched out his hand to take a grab. The paintings of mountains and rivers formed by sword-treading mountains and rivers instantly shrunk towards his hand and transformed into a sword pellet. Qin Mu swung his sword, and from the sword pellet was a sword light that was as thick as a bucket. The sword pillar faced the demon knife, and Qin Mu was thrown off from the collision. He flew backward and left the back of Qi Jui. He had used several great divine arts repeatedly, and all kinds of divine arts scattered down like rain. He didn't have much vital qi left, and he couldn't face off with Zhehuali. Zhehuali gave an internal sigh when he didn't kill him with one knife. He kept the knife light that filled the sky. Tens of thousands of knife light combined and transformed back into a demon knife to fly back. It sheathed itself in the knife sheath behind Zhehuali's back. After all, Zhehuali was also just defeated by Qi Jui, and he was covered in injuries. Even though his vital qi cultivation left was much denser than Qin Mu, if they really fought, he wasn't confident that he could take down Qin Mu. Furthermore, if he could kill Qin Mu, he would have to personally face Qi Jui, and Qi Jui's abilities were also above his, otherwise, he would have been defeated by him. Zhehuali kept the knife back in the sheath, and he said with a smile, "Senior brothers, we have to see each other frequently, so why don't we each take a step back and everything will be fine?" Qi Jui's true body landed on the ground, and his body trembled. He gave a painful cry and gradually transformed back into a human. There were still 9 swords stuck in his 9 heads, and when his 9 heads combined into one, the 9 swords didn't combine into one, and they almost tore open his wound. Qi Jui hurriedly pulled out the swords. His back was all bloodied, and he had broken many bones. He shattered quite a few ribs, so he could only stoop his body. He was originally a handsome young man with an elegant demeanor, but after this beating from Qin Mu, he was even more miserable than when he got beaten up by Qin Mu and Zhehuali together. He couldn't live up to that title any longer. Luckily for him, his recovery speed was astonishing, so as long as he didn't die, it wasn't a big problem. Qin Mu walked over, and the 3 of them stood in a triangle. Qin Mu looked at the 9 flying swords, and he asked pleasantly, "Brother Qi's abilities are strong. If you didn't insist on using the mirror to fix me in place, you might not have lost. If we fight for life and death, it's actually 50-50. Brother Qi, can you return those flying swords to me?" Qi Jui sneered, and he grabbed the 9 swords tightly. 50-50? You are underestimating the divine arts of the celestial heavens. Brother Qin, can you return the mirror to me? No. Qin Mu waved his hand and said, "You can keep the 9 swords first. I'll take them back once I kill you. Senior brother Li, can you return that small case to me? I have exchanged that with my life. Both of you had blocked the door with your divine arts. If it wasn't for my wits, I would have almost died." Zhehuali gave a dry laugh, and he said righteously, "Brother Qin should take it back after killing me. How could I do that?" Qin Mu's face was full of smiles. Qi Jui was also staring at the small case in Zhehuali's hands. Zhehuali's gaze flickered, and he probed, "Brother Qi's identity is respected, and the position of your teacher is also extremely high in the celestial heavens. You should know how to activate this case. Can you tell me?" Qi Jui coughed violently and spat out pieces of shattered bones. His crooked body straightened slightly, and the sword mark that Qin Mu left on his forehead also slowly shrunk. This made both Zhehuali and Qin Mu felt nervous. The recovery speed of this Qi Jui was simply too powerful. He was simply an undying body that couldn't be killed. He could still recover so fast while having such heavy injuries. The reason why he spat of the shattered bones should be because of the new ribs growing in his chest. Qin Mu was very envious. This kind of undying body was truly useful. He just didn't know if it was the effect of Qi Jui's Emperor's Throne technique, or if it was an innate talent of the 9-headed phoenix race. After coughing, Qi Jui felt better and panted heavily. "Give me the small case. Let me open it for you." It was evident that even though his injuries could help fast, it still took a huge toll on his body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so tired. Zhehuali shook his head, and he said, "After this small case land in your hands, and you open it to show God execution mysterious knife, Brother Qin and I will instantly have our heads separated from our body." Qin Mu suggested and said, "Why don't we do it like this? Brother Li, let us first get rid of Brother Qi. We can then study how to open this small case. With the intelligence of the 2 of us, we can definitely open it." Shahuali said with a smile. If I believe you, I would be an idiot. The three of them were at a stalemate. Suddenly, a coarse voice rang from their back. You guys keep fighting back and forth, but have you asked me, the original owner? Return this small case to the rightful owner. Qin Mu and the rest had a huge change in expression, and he hurriedly looked at the source of the sound. He saw Qi Shi, who was skinny as a match, walking towards them with legs that were like firewood. They were already not far from here. This executioner of Crimson Light era had 3 heads that were like shriveled-up black tomatoes. His eye sockets were sunken in, and his eyeballs were like dried-up dates. The lions below his 3 heads were also wrinkly, as though he couldn't hold up his own heads. He was like a big prawn with 3 heads. The 3 arms on his left were propped onto one stick. He must have propped the stick to move forward with difficulty. Qin Mu and Qi Jui had fought here fiercely, and the activity was extremely huge. It wasn't hard for Qi Shi to find his way here. However, from seeing how much trouble he had with the rod, one had to wonder he had made his way here. After all, Qin Mu had to escape for a long time before finally meeting Qi Jui. Qi Shi must have remarkable abilities, and that must be the reason why, even though walking was difficult, he could still use some magic power. Veins popped out on his forehead, and he thought of another matter. He muttered to himself and said, "It had rained. That's right, it had rained." Qi Shi had an appearance as though he could die any time. He said weakly, "After you left, it rained not long later. The heaven took pity on me, and I finally managed to drink some water that isn't poisoned." Qin Mu blinked his eyes and stood there without moving. Shahuali and Jahuali were already gradually retreating, and the 2 of them suddenly turned to run. Thud thud. The 2 of them crashed onto an invisible wall and got bounced back. Qi Shi said indifferently, "There's still no person who can escape from my hand in this world. Yes, you are the first, you escaped, you should be proud." The person he meant was Qin Mu, and Qin Mu revealed an honest smile. Suddenly, Shahuali threw the small case straight to Qin Mu, and he shouted, "Brother Qin, I shall return you your treasure. The green mountains won't change, and the flow of the river is endless." When he finished saying, he crashed into the invisible wall again. Shahuali could only turn back and stand there obediently. On the other side, Qin Mu's honest smile froze, and he threw out the small case he received to Qi Jui. He said with a smile, "Brother Qi, you can open the case. This case now belongs to you. Merely a dried corpse of Crimson Light era. To dare to go against the celestial heavens. Let me kill him." Qi Jui gave a faint smile, and his fingers moved up and down. Runes flowed out continuously from his 10 fingers as he tried to open the case. After a while, his face turned black. He couldn't open this case at all. The case that contained God Execution Mysterious Knife in the Celestial Heavens also had a seal. He knew the arrangement of the runes for that case, but the rune arrangement needed to open this case that had come from Crimson Light era was obviously different from the one in the Celestial Heavens. The corners of Qi Jui's eyes twitched, and he looked at Qin Mu in despair. Qin Mu looked up in the sky, and his feet tapped on the ground as he pretended to admire the clouds in the sky. Qi Jui looked at Jahuali helplessly, and Jahuali looked at his own fingernails seriously before biting the nail on his thumb. Qi Jui looked at the 3-headed and 6-armed dried corpse that was currently walking towards him. He suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he knelt down while holding the small case up high. "Senior, pardon my life." Qi Shi sneered and walked over shakily while propping himself on the rod. This case naturally used the rune arrangement of Crimson Light era. When you the runes of your so-called celestial heavens to solve it, isn't it just playing the lute to a cow? This case, you guys aren't fighting over it anymore? It's pretty lively to see you guys fighting over it, go on. Qin Mu blinked his eyes and looked at Jahuali. Jahuali also looked at him and thought to himself, "He must be thinking of the same thing as me, if he should also kneel down and beg for his life. Should I kneel or not?" He was in a dilemma. Qin Mu thought to himself, "It seems that Jahuali is truly my nemesis, to have thought of the same thing as me. No matter what, Qi Shi will take the life of all 3 of us and use our blood to nourish his corporeal body. He will definitely maintain his unflinching righteousness like me. So no one is fighting over this case anymore?" Qi Shi sneered and walked up with the rod. "Since no one wants it, I shall." Suddenly, a voice rang out. I want. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 610 Opening the Case. Qin Mu, Zhehuali and the heart of the rest shook. They hurriedly looked towards the sound and they saw this palm grabbing the small case away. Meanwhile, the palm belonged to a man who was carrying a huge axe and wearing a bamboo hat. He had huge arms, round waist, thick eyebrows and big eyes. He looked like a woodcutter that had just taken down the firewood he was carrying, but there were very intense traits of a scholar on his face, completely different from his attire and manners. The small case that was in his hand looked very small and delicate. Saint Woodcutter. Qin Mu was delighted. Zhehuali was astonished. Heavenly Teacher. On the other side, Qi Jui, who was still kneeling, secretly raised an eye and he was shocked. The person who wanted to sacrifice Luofu Heaven and forced Fu Riluo to have no choice but to sign a pact of earth count. He quietly stood up and moved back. He wanted to leave, yet he didn't dare to. Qi Shi's 3 heads and 6 arms were withered and skinny. He raised his head up with difficulty to examine this woodcutter and he sneered. You want it? You dare to take it? Saint Woodcutter lifted up this squarish case and examined it. Why don't I dare to? You haven't even regained your cultivation, you don't even have your corporeal body. If you were at your peak, I would go somewhat easy on you. Now that you aren't, I don't even have the desire to fight you. Take it. He sliced open his wrist and his god blood flowed out from his wrist. Qi Shi stared at the god blood flowing out from him and he couldn't resist any longer. He opened his mouth and the god blood flowing out from Saint Woodcutter's wrist flowed towards his 3 mouths. Receiving Saint Woodcutter's blood, his emaciated body gradually bulged up at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. Blood flowed in his blood vessel and the beating of his heart also gradually became louder and louder. All of the withered organs in his body had their functions restored one by one. His vital qi grew more and more vigorous. His face slowly became rosy and he gradually regained his original look. Qi Shi could also be countered as a middle-aged man with quite a look. The 3 faces on his 3 heads were exactly the same, having eyebrows that were like swords. The murderous aura between his eyebrows was very heavy, and it might be because he was once an executioner of Crimson Light era. His aura gradually grew stronger and he soon made the bodies of Qin Mu, Zhehuali and Qi Jui trembled. They had no choice but to fall back. When he had more or less recovered, the wound on Saint Woodcutter's wrist healed and it no longer bled. Your primordial spirit has withered for 20,000 years. You shall slowly nurse yourself back. Saint Woodcutter's gaze was always on the small case. He never looked at Qi Shi in the eyes. After a moment, he asked, Qin Mu, where's this small case from? Qin Mu said, Big senior brother found it. Him. Saint Woodcutter was astonished and he asked, Where is he? Big senior brother has never appeared. I had found an evil dragon that he was suppressing in a ruin in great ruins. I have slain the evil dragon and the star sand in the cauldron of the big senior brother showed me numerous geographical map. However, he didn't show himself. Qin Mu quickly talked about the whole incident and he said, The vicinity of God execution stage on this abnormal star was one of the maps. As I searched according to the map, I found my way here and found this small case. Big senior brother used heavenly cycle stars killing formation to keep this small case locked and he left a difficult algebra question. I solved the question and discovered it's 35,000 years. 35,000 years. Saint Woodcutter muttered to himself irresolutely. Why did this idiot still have to leave behind riddles? Is he giving me some hint? What's the meaning of him leaving behind so many geographical maps? These maps aren't left behind for you. It's for me. He wants me to find the clues he has left behind. It's pure coincidence that you could find the geographical maps he left behind. Qin Mu said, 35,000 years ago, it's Crimson Light era. This senior Qi Shi is from 35,000 years ago. Saint Woodcutter nodded his head. I know, when I saw his 3 heads and 6 arms appearance, I knew he was from Crimson Light era. I have once found ruins of that era and discovered that the people of that era view 3 heads and 6 arms as the strongest corporeal body. They had remarkable abilities, being able to shift mountains and chase stars. This small case is also from that era, The shape is the same as the God Execution mysterious knife of the so-called celestial heavens. I don't know who had copied who. Qi Jui didn't dare to speak, but he sneered in his heart. It definitely was Crimson Light Celestial Heavens that had imitated the God Execution mysterious knife that our celestial heavens had created. Qin Mu pondered and took out the commander's seal that Elder Qing Huang had given him. Sacred teacher, Big Senior Brother had left this item with Elder Qing Huang. Even he didn't know what era is this commander's seal from. Saint Woodcutter took over the commander's seal and he examined it. He said with a chuckle, Elder Qing Huang? You mean Green Emperor, right? This fellow always has a bad temper and appeared to be cold to everyone, however. He is very warm-hearted. Did he say any bad things about me behind my back? Qin Mu hurriedly shook his head and he said firmly, No, definitely not. Elder Qing Huang was very polite and amiable. He was hospitable to be and even saw me off. He didn't scold anyone. It will be weird if he didn't. He would have definitely scolded me and even Founding Emperor as well. He must have chased you off. Saint Woodcutter threw that commander's seal back to him and said with a smile, I know his temper inside out. I can't see when is this commander's seal from and I don't know when was it left behind. You should keep it first. Hold it. Qi Shi's gaze landed on the commander's seal on Qin Mu's hand and he said solemnly, Let me see that commander's seal. I might just recognize it. Qin Mu looked at Saint Woodcutter who nodded his head gently. Qin Mu moved forward and handed the commander's seal to Qi Shi. Qi Shi checked repeatedly and said, This is a commander's seal from Dragon Han era. There are numerous ruins from Dragon Han era during Crimson Light era. I have seen these kinds of things before. That child, I will return this to you. Qin Mu took over the commander's seal and he said puzzledly, Big Senior Brother handed the commander's seal from Dragon Han era to Elder Qing Huang for safekeeping. What's the meaning of this? Elder Qing Huang is the Lord of the East during Founding Emperor era. For Big Senior Brother to request him to safekeep this, he must have viewed it very important. What exactly is the secret that lies in this? Saint Woodcutter said with a smile, Since he left numerous geographical maps, just search accordingly to the maps. You will definitely solve the mysteries sooner or later. Qin Mu acknowledged. Qi Shi said indifferently, This Tao friend, this small case belongs to my Crimson Light Celestial Heavens. Since you have gifted your blood to me, the grudge between me and this child shall be written off. Saint Woodcutter finally turned his head around and said seriously, Old Tao friend, this small case left behind by my big disciple for me, it's mine, so I can't give it to you. The reason I gifted my blood to you is because if we fall out, I won't have the face to beat you, therefore, I let you recover some of your cultivation first. If we fall out, I'll beat you. I have just forced Fu Riluo back and came searching. Only then did I see you bullying my disciple and these two juniors. That's not the manner of a senior, so I was slightly unhappy seeing that. Qi Shi sneered. His corporeal body and primordial spirit had not completely recovered, so he was also slightly afraid of this woodcutter. There's no use even if you get my small case. Without the rune arrangement of my Crimson Light Celestial Heavens, you can't undo the lock. Saint Woodcutter revealed a smile and the small case floated up from his rough hands. His fingers moved up and down. Strange runes burst forth from his fingertips and entered the small case one after another. He said leisurely, I have dabbled into too many things and delayed my cultivation. I have been to the ruins of Crimson Light era numerous times, and I also know about the runes in that era of yours. The small case rattled as sounds of locks opening came from it. The sounds became more and more concentrated, as though there were locks that were slowly opening inside. The cores of the locks were moving back one by one. Qi Shi's expression changed hugely, and his aura rose drastically. He wanted to make a move, but he held himself back. Meanwhile, Shahuali and Qi Jui's face turned ashen, and they cursed silently. Saint Woodcutter was the enemy of the celestial heavens and the devil race. If he opened God Execution Mysterious Knife, he was probably going to offer a sacrifice to the knife. Every time God Execution Mysterious Knife was opened, it needed a sacrifice, the blood of humans to moisturize the knife. The manner of this woodcutter seems to be very good. Hope he doesn't sacrifice us and sacrifice this fellow with 3 heads and 6 arms. In their hearts were fear and even anticipation. They wanted to see the fierce weapon that was contained in this chest. Suddenly, the small case let out a light sound and opened up slightly. Instantly, blood light spewed out from the sky and dyed everyone in red. Even their hair was also dyed red. In the sky, blood clouds poured forth as though blood were swirling. The center of this cloud whirlpool corresponded to the location of this small case. Even though the case gave off blood light and looked warm, everyone felt as though they had fallen into an icy pit. The murderous aura from the case froze their primordial spirit and made them unable to move. Their souls were also completely frozen. It was as though if they made a move, a knife light would slash over to slay them. What a fierce weapon! Saint Woodcutter had a grim expression and he lifted the small case up. His other hand grabbed the cover of the case and said solemnly, "You guys have fought quite some time just for this small case, right? Now I shall open it and show you." She revealed an expression of fear and quickly retreated into the distance. Jui and Jahuali wanted to go, but they couldn't. They could only stare at Saint Woodcutter opening the case. The case gradually opened and Saint Woodcutter's expression became grimmer and grimmer. His hands were trembling slightly and he seemed to be spending quite some effort as well. He was suppressing the fierce might inside the case and he suddenly gave a shout. Exploding with full force, he suppressed the fierce aura and opened up the case. Qinmu, Jahuali, and Jui couldn't help looking into the case, and there was really a human head in this small case. This human head didn't have its outer layer of skin as though it had been stripped off. Yet there was no color of blood underneath. Under his skin, his flesh and blood were crystal white as though they were formed by light. Behind his head, tentacles that looked like blood vessels and also flesh and blood were connected to the interior of the case. It was as though they were grown together with the case. It wasn't known what spell Crimson Light Celestial Heavens had used to fuse the head of an emperor's throne-strong practitioner together with a case. That crystal-like head still hasn't died, and he opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with white light that was contained inside and not released. There were no black pupils, and they were only white. It was as if they weren't of physical substance. Light coming out from the eyes were a foot long, and it was sometimes long and sometimes short. Meanwhile, those tentacles behind his head were continuously trembling and giving off sounds that were like insects flapping their wings. It was as if the head was very excited and wanted to slaughter someone to drink their blood. Qinmu saw this wherever these tentacles touched the head. There were indeed extremely fine wings. Bang! Saint Woodcutter covered up the case and took in deep breaths. Opening up the case to control the fierce might of the case's bloodthirst was even more tiring than his fight with Fu Riluo. "Ain't sacred teacher offering a sacrifice to the knife?" Qinmu asked as he took a glance at Jui and Jahuali.